In the first book of Samuel in the Hebrew Bible, we learn of the rise of first Saul of the tribe of Benjamin, and then David of the tribe of Judah. Furthermore, there's is also, in my opinion, a crossover, or this exchange of values for one another, and the value system is one of morality. How do we, or how, what value do we place in different pieces of like knowledge, or what we call the moral of the story? Like, what do we gather from a story? And we have a bunch of different stories, so we have a bunch of different pieces, and then together, all that as a whole, right, is our kind of more morality in total. And before the Semitic gods, that we know from Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, there were other gods that were worshipped, right? Pagans. We can imagine Israeli or Canaanite pagan gods would have been analogous to other pagan gods in the Greek pantheon. So when we think of Athenian or Spartan religion, well, we know what we think of, right? We think of Apollo or Athena, or perhaps the most iconic of the Greek gods is something like Poseidon, right? That we all think of as Trident. He is one of the most iconic, right, of the gods. Or there's Zeus, right? That we all think of God as this kind of guy in the sky with his toga or this robe, and then he's in the clouds, right? And he's powerful, and he's kind of old, and of course he's like European, right? If you think of that he's European, then you think of a Zeus type of god. And of course he has his lightning bolt, right? He's his most iconic of all symbols. So nonetheless, the pagan gods, they persist, right? And they inspire imagery, and they have this whole host of symbols associated with them that we can recall in memory without much thought. Whereas Judaism is transmitted through some symbols, yes, but mostly word and text. So the symbols are they're in the text, but they're not necessarily, we don't necessarily recall them from memory, right? If you're not Jewish, you probably don't know. So when we watch something on TV, we're kind of unconscious or unaware of the symbols being used. So unless you're initiated into these cultic, these cults, and you're familiar with their iconographies and such, you won't know what's going on. So we don't really need to watch a movie on Moses, right, for the underlying message to be about Moses. And so through just an analysis of the symbols, one can come to the conclusion that God or Zeus exist, or that he exists in our imagination, right? We make him real, or her, right? If you believe in like Athena or something, that she's real. That we have this kind of cyclopean being, right? That we live in this time. Well, we still live in a time of the cyclopes. We send a text. It's like a cloud, right? And we all send text. It's probably something we do the most. And then we say, I'm going to the store. Somebody says, what are you doing? I'm saying, I'm going to go do this. What are you doing? And they say, I'm going to go do this. Or maybe you say the opposite. I'm not going to do that, right? But in the end, it's Zeus, right? Because who is Zeus? Well, Zeus, of course, he reveals himself as being. So he's literally in the form of the verb to be. The will is fulfilled by the future. Moreover, we all say that we all use the word they, or use the word they, as well as the word the. Again, we prove or insist that God exists because we believe in him or her, that things do exist, right? And we legitimize the existence through words, whether it's in some image in our head of what Zeus looks like, or quite physically in being in the world as tree or animal or storms in the sky, or as God, as the word of the Bible that we read about him. So once upon a time, God was just images on the rocks and walls that were translated eventually through mediums or oracles, and then man became to understand God as like similar to them, right? That these writings are on the wall, the hieroglyphs, and then eventually coming with the Semites, we get a semantic transposing of God and morality into language and words, and it eventually ends up for the masses, right? We understand that cuneiform, or the Akkadian cuneiform, was Semitic language, right? And it's one of the first languages. but it's not. It might not even be older than hieroglyphs, but the power in this kind of new language, or being able to write down kind of these images, is if things become more compact, you organize the thoughts better, and then overall you're able to kind of make a more dense material, right? So think of the difference. Well, so think of the difference, right, between the Semitic Akkadian cuneiform and the Egyptian hieroglyphs, right? That well, the myths might have been Egyptian, right, or something in origin, but we don't really know what the Egyptian myths were like, but we know more about say the Sumerians, right? Even though it's like 5,000 years ago, we can still understand their myths, right? Because they wrote it down in the cuneiform. Right, so man used to worship sun, sky, moon, etc. But now we kind of just worship this Jewish conception of God, and it's written about plainly in the Bible. Anybody can go pick up a Bible and read about God. But that's not to say that the plain speak itself is not misleading, right? Or it's not deep, or it's not profound, or even that it's not right, right? That the devil is in the details, right? So, and I think that's kind of the promise, well, with the JEM theory, right? So Mark Brahman has kind of systematized this analysis of the symbols, and it's helpful, right? Because, well, it makes the process easier, because when reading, you already have this perception or expectation of symbology, right? So it allows this kind of proper reevaluation of morality, or this recontextualizing of it. Because say you have a symbol and then it's negated or maybe mirrored or so, right? So it's reflected. How do we go about, well, first understanding what it is that's reflected, and then going about to reverse it, so that you end up making sense, or you're speaking truth, right? Not this kind of negation of the truth. How do you realize it's a reflection? So once you have this systematized way of analysis, you'll begin to understand the glyphs, right? the writing on the wall, so to speak. You can imagine the glyphs were interpreted and then projected onto a new medium, the written word. So the sun, S-U-N, is confused with son, S-O-N, right? This is probably the most common or important transformation of the image onto the word, right? That the sun, the symbol of Apollo, and God, literally Helios, Elios, El, right? The Son of God. But he becomes the Son, the S-O-N of God. And then for some people, it's almost like a God in his own right, that the Christians worship Jesus more than God himself, almost sometimes it seems like. So now Christians, they worship the symbol of the word, the semantics, and that it is the Son of the God, right? This Jewish rabbi that they worship. You could go even as far to say that the Son is God, or was God at a time, that most people believed that he was God, right? Before other conceptions like sky, time, heaven, for example. In the Iliad, Zeus is called the son of Kronos. But wouldn't the sun really be the son of time, right? That, not to say that Zeus is like some kind of bad person or subversive character. It's just in the past, the solar deity was sometimes fused with the sky god, or they became somewhat similar, right? Another thought could be that maybe the Shamash, or a solar god, was thought of just that, good, right? His value is good. And other deities were associated with other kind of earthly values. And if we accept this kind of Semitic transformation of values, then good, or the sun, or the natural light, or truth, or even God, becomes bad. He becomes earthly. He sets, and he becomes like this dark and somewhat deceiving character, right? Everything becomes reversed. And then vice versa, right? The earthly God becomes good and heavenly, right? And that's how we understand Christianity. Nonetheless, like I said, the old symbols persist. We know that moon, owl, sun, truth, these are all kind of linked in ways, and they're linked through the myths, right? That's how we can reconcile it. And Zeus is still imagined as the lightning bearer, and we understand the existence of God, again, in the cyclopean forms. So, in the first book of Samuel, we start off with a character named Elkanah and his two wives, where the name Elkanah or Elkanah is probably understood as something like the god of Canaan, or the Canaanite god. So I'd imagine it could be something like Zeus or Bel, Moloch, or maybe even a Zeus or a god that came before Zeus that was similar to him. So one of these pre-Judaic gods. So reading from the first book of Samuel, Elkanah and his wives. So Elkanah had two wives. The name of the one was Hannah, and then the name of the other was Penina. And Penina had children, but Hannah had no children. And this man went up out of his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice unto the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord, were there. And when the time was that Elkanah offered, he gave to Penina his wife and to all her sons and her daughters portions. But unto Hannah he gave a worthy portion, for he loved Hannah, but the Lord had shut up her womb, and her adversary also provoked her sore, for to make her fret, because the Lord had shut up her womb. And as he had did so year by year, when she went up to the house of the Lord, so she provoked her. Therefore she wept and did not eat. Then said Elkanah her husband to her, Hannah, why weepest thou, and why eatest thou not? And why is thy heart grieved? Am not I better to thee than 10 sons? So, like many Jewish myths, the book of Samuel starts in the middle of a fertility crisis. So, it's a fertility crisis, and that one group of people is having more babies than another group, where Hannah is the wife of Elkanah, and she has no children because God has shut up her womb. And the wife Penina has had all the children. And when I say the fertility crisis, it's like other Hebrew myths in that one can easily recall Exodus, the difference in the reproductive rates of the Israelites and the Egyptians. But also from Genesis, there is Sarah and Hagar, and then also Leah and Rachel. There's this kind of general nature of reoccurrence of this theme in Jewish mythology. So moving along, one possible etymology for the wives of Elkanah is that Hannah means 9, making her, in my opinion, like the Greek goddess Hera, which according to some translator means 9, literally the number 9, right? The digit 9. So where in Greek 9 is Enea, or in Latin it's nona, and then right in English it's 9. So digging deeper into the numerology of 9, the Trojan War in the Iliad is unfruitful for 9 years. And it's the 10th year that finally there's this sacking of the city. And then if you go by the moons, it's 10 months for births. And then it's 9 solar months for the average birth, right? If you weren't going by like a lunar year, you're going more so by a solar year, that you'd probably end up with that the average birth is 9 months, right? Because your days would probably be a little longer than the lunar month. And that Penina perhaps is 5, or right to repent or do 5 twice is 10, or the time it takes for the city Troy to fall. That the Lord, and then in Samuel the Lord repents for making Saul king in Samuel 15, right? So if you have 10 and 5, that's 15. Or maybe that. I don't know, maybe that Penina means literally, could just mean 1, right? That it's like a penny, but because the Jewish translations don't really reveal so much. In Greek, there's a word, else or aelwo, meaning basically to shut in or pen in, and that, right, again, that God in the Hebrew Bible shuts Hannah's womb up, and it's Penina that is having the children, right? So it's maybe that it's something to do with shepherding. And in Book 1 of the Iliad, the word else is used as pen up, or we can imagine like the very name Penina to pen in, or that Penina has the children because the myth is, it's a parable for herding of animals, to domesticate them and then grow your flock. And of course, Apollo himself was a shepherd god until he gave the caduceus to Hermes, right? So from the Homeric hymn, we know that there's this kind of the moral of the story is that Apollo has given the caduceus to Hermes. And then the Amorites themselves started as sheep herding pastoralists, and before some became rich from trading grain. And eventually the most famous of these Amorites, right, was Hammurabi, who founded Babylon. And they, of course, they spoke a Semitic language, but it's not quite sure who exactly the Amorites were, right? Just because you speak the language does not mean genetically you're related to that linguistic group. Moving on. So let's read from Book 1 of the Iliad. For often I have heard you glorying in the halls of my father, and declaring that you alone among the immortals warded off shameful ruin from the son of Cronos, lord of the dark clouds, on the day when the other Olympians wished to put him in bonds, even Hera and Poseidon and Pallas Athena. But you came, goddess, and freed him from his bonds, when you had quickly called to high Olympus him of the 100 hands, whom the gods call Briareus. But all men, Aegeon, for he is mightier than his father. He sat down by the side of the son of Cronos, exulting in his glory. And the blessed gods were seized with fear of him, and did not bind Zeus. Bring this now to his remembrance, and sit side by side and clasp his knees, in hope that he might perhaps wish to succor to the Trojans, for those other, the Achaeans, to pen them in among the sterns of their ships and around the sea as they are slain, so that they may all have profit of their king. For some context of this part of the Iliad in Book 1, Achilles, he's crying to his mother to go off to Zeus and ask Zeus to give Achilles his glory in war, right? So in response, Thetis, the mother of Achilles, she goes off to Mount Olympus and bows down to Zeus, which essentially I understand is kind of this worship of Moloch, right? Because, she's sacrificing Achilles. And then comparing to the Bible, it's interesting that Hera, or in Samuel 1, Hannah, both these wives are both jealous of this other woman in relation to their husband, right? So Hera is jealous of Thetis, and Hannah of Penina. There are other possible etymologies for Hannah and Penina. That Penina means to curl, coral, or it's like a corrugated surface. We could even say that it means to corral. On the other hand, and then there's other things too, right? That we understand that curl and curl in Greek is like helix, right, or helical. It's also related to the sun. On the other hand, Hannah means grace or gracious, but again, I find Hannah to mean 9 more so, and that Penina is kind of meaning 5, and then repenting meaning 10 or possibly 15. For example, in Samuel 1, chapter 1, Elkanah or Elkanah, I'm not sure how you say it, foolishly tells Hannah that he himself is better than 10 sons, than her having what she actually wants, right? 1 son. So it's a bit of hubris when we understand that, again, son is a homophone of sun, and likewise in ancient Greek as well, that helios, he means something like a torch of light or light itself, right? And that light, it implies that you can see. That's what light implies. That the word Thena or Theon is like saying deity or God, but also means shining or bright. Again, like something you would point at and say, the can is shiny, right? The can is shiny. You can see the can because it is shiny. Or look over there as the shiny look over there at the shiny object. The root is the same. The, T-H-E. And then, of course, Apollo is this god of theory. He's also this apolitical god. And then we also know him as the son of Zeus, the chief god. In the Iliad, Agamemnon says to Nestor in Book 2, he says, and Agamemnon answered, Nestor, you have again outdone the sons of the sons of the Achaeans in council. Would by Father Jove, Minerva, and Apollo that I had among them 10 more such counselors, for the city of King Priam would then soon fall beneath our hands, and we should sack it. Moreover, in the beginning of the Iliad, it's Apollo who is wreaking the most havoc, that for 9 whole days, it's said in the beginning of Book 1, that he shot his arrows and caused a plague. So again, from Book 1 of the Iliad. For 9 whole days he shot his arrows among the people, but upon the 10th day Achilles called them in assembly, moved thereto by Juno, who saw the Achaeans in their death throes, and had compassion upon them. Then when they were got together, he rose and spoke among them. Son of Atreus, said he, I deem that we should now turn roving home, if we would escape destruction, for we are being cut down by war and pestilence at once. Let us ask some priest or prophet or some reader of dreams, for dreams too are of Job, who can tell us why Phoebus Apollo is so angry, and say whether it is for some vow that we have broken or hecatomb that we have not offered, and whether he will accept the savor of lambs and goats without blemish, so as to take away the plague from us. One might wonder if it's Apollo that caused the plagues in Egypt against the Pharaoh, or at least I have wondered this, right? So if I claim Agamemnon is Moses and Achilles is Pharaoh, you would assume I would also wonder, right, if the opposite is true, that being Agamemnon is Pharaoh and Achilles is Moses. Oh, just out of curiosity, but in reality, just you want to find the best and consistent interpretation. So in my conclusion, I understand Agamemnon, he's like Moses. And he's also like the Lord in the book of Samuel. And Samuel is like Nestor and Hephaestus, right? So Samuel's kind of like Nestor, and he's kind of like Hephaestus. Eli, well, he's like Apollo. And then Saul is like, well, he's like Menelaus. So you might ask, well, how can Eli be Apollo and Hephaestus like Samuel? Well, again, it's just a matter of semantics, that the sun is replaced by the son, S-O-N, of Hera. And Hephaestus, that the son of Hera, Hephaestus, and it's again this semantic or Semitic words of gods will replace the symbol of the sun, and everything becomes kind of reversed. That Hephaestus means to let go, right? You would imagine cast from Olympus, but also he means kin or kindle, literally related to someone, but also he's kind of like a burnt piece of wood. And then the sun, well, he means basically, the sun is basically a big hot ball of flames, right? We can all feel the heat coming from the sun. But also, he is a son, right? He's the S-O-N. He's the son of the chief god Zeus. In the end of the first book of the Iliad, after Thetis gets Zeus to swear that Achilles will get his glory, so basically Thetis has gone to Zeus and she sacrificed Achilles to Zeus. It is Hera and Hephaestus who interact after that, right? So let's read further from the first book of Samuel, chapter 1. So we'll go back to the Bible. And here, Hannah prays for her son. Hannah rose up after they had eaten in Shiloh and after they had drunk. Now Eli the priest sat upon a seat by a post of the temple of the Lord. And she was in bitterness of soul and prayed unto the Lord and wept sore. And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look of the affliction on thine handmaid, and remember me, and not forget thine handmaid, but wilt give unto thine handmaid a man-child, then I will give unto the Lord all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come upon his head. And it came to pass, as she continued praying before the Lord, that Eli marked her mouth. Now Hannah, she spake in her heart, only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought she had been drunken. And Eli said unto her, How long wilt thou be drunken? Put away thy wine from thee. And Hannah answered and said, No, my lord, I am a woman of sorrowful spirit. I have drunken neither wine nor strong drink, but have poured out my soul before the Lord. Count not thine handmaid for a daughter of Belial, for out of the abundance of my complaining grief have I spoken hitherto. Then Eli answered and said, Go in peace, and God of Israel grant thee thy petition, and thou hast asked of him. And she said, Let thine handmaid find grace in thine sight. So the woman went her way and did eat, and her countenance was no more sad. Again, this is like in the Iliad, that Thetis, she comes to Zeus and asks for her son Achilles to receive his glory, and that Troy will be sacked, right? There's going to be this repentance, the 10-year cycle over, and then the birth or piercing of the wall of Troy. That Eli is, again, Helios or Apollo, and in the Iliad, it's the Chryse that comes to the rescue of his daughter, Chryseis, right? And then they're both sent back on their way, and it's Apollo who grants them the appeasement after the sacrifice, because he's the one who originally sent the 9 days of plague. There is also a mirror to this in the Iliad, again, where Hephaestus, he spends 9 years with Eurynomy and Tethys, right? It's kind of similar to Thetis, but it's different. After being flung down from Olympus by Zeus, and it's, again, the 10th year we imagine he comes back to Olympus. And at the end of Book 1 in the Iliad, Hera and Hephaestus talk, and it's Hephaestus tells his mother to go give pleasant words to Zeus, or else he again toss them down again. So ultimately, power rests with Zeus, the Lord. Samuel, in the Bible, he means like the sign of God, or the sign of the Lord. And we get this from the Greek word sema, or direction. And then it comes from sign, semantic. And you'd imagine Semitic, right? This probably comes from this as well, or maybe these words are derived from Semitic. And the root is something like Sam, right, from Samuel. The implication is the word will replace the symbol of the sun, or the sun itself, right, with the son of Hera, Hephaestus. Semantic is like the word semantiko in Greek, so it's similar to Samantha, like the girl named Samantha, or Samuel, the man name. And then Sam's kind of like the childish or short name. Basically, the sign or symbol of God, the written language. If God is being, or he exists, then logos is the description of him. We understand this through a seminology or seminarian, right? The art of semen, or the direction that you're. It's kind of ambiguous, right? That we understand it's kind of an ambiguous thing, that you're either be ruled by race, or this familial patriarchy, or it's going to be words, this more feminine world. And you could have a little bit of both, right? I think that's ultimately that we live in a little bit of both, that words and symbol kind of interact. It's somewhat ambiguous sometimes. There's multiple meanings. Remember that Hephaestus, he's raised by Tethys and Eurynomy. So it's the broad rearing and law, or it's this matriarchy, right? And that Thetis, the mother of Achilles, goes and sits at the feet of Zeus like he is Bel or Moloch. And then in Samuel 1 in the Bible, Hannah says, "Count not thine handmaid for Belial." That's like Thetis again, that she's referenced, right? That she doesn't want her son to be a handmaid for Belial. So my interpretation is that Hannah or Hera is like number 9, and that she's going to wait for the sign of God, Samuel, to be born. 9 is the sign of birth, right? Of course, that in the Iliad, Hera is all jealous of Thetis, right? Or she's all like, she knows what's going on, right? She's kind of poking and prodding at Zeus, and then Zeus flips out on her. Is like, "You better watch out. I'll throw you and your son down from heaven, or from Olympus." And then, of course, Hephaestus has to calm her down after that. So, going further in the Iliad, in Book 2, it's Athena who comes down from heaven like a meteorite at the behest of Hera, and it's reminiscent of her stepson, or adopted son, Erichthonius, who was born from the semen of Hephaestus when he tried to rape Athena. So again, there's a little bit more to it. It's somewhat of a reoccurrent theme. And then she wiped the ejaculated sperm off her thigh with a wool cloth, and then threw it down to earth. And then that throwing down, that semen mixed with the earth, and then Erichthonius was born, and he was like the founder of Athens, like their founding story. And he's kind of like he's like a knockoff of Apollo, right? He's like this like bootleg Apollo or something, right? He's like adopted a lot of the symbology, but he's probably somewhat of a subversive character, right? That he's not out and out Apollo. He can't just come out and claim that he's Apollo. Then obviously semen is like semantic, right? That Samuel, Sama, sign, direction. These all kind of mean the same thing. Hera means the wind. And Hephaestus, well, he's fire. And then the fire, well, it grows with air or wind to some extent, right? We can imagine combustion of materials requires oxygen and heat. And then a meteorite burns up in the sky. But likewise, a mirror will cause fire to combust. What seems spontaneous, well, it's not spontaneous. It's that the air combines with the heat, or sometimes that you make fire with friction. But if you have a mirror, you just focus the light into a beam, and then you make heat, right? And then it combines with the air that's just abundant in the atmosphere, and then the combustible material, the wood, catches on fire. And then we understand this, right? That Zeus, he casts down Hephaestus, the fire god, in tension. It's like this bout of tension that we get this. Oh, some you can understand maybe as like a meteorite, like Erichthonius. From Book 1 of the Iliad, wife said, Job, "I can do nothing but you suspect me and I find out, you will take nothing by it, for I shall only dislike you the more, and it will go harder with you, granted that it is as you say. I mean to have it as so. Sit down and hold your tongue as I bid you, for if I once again begin to lay hands about you, though all heaven were on your side, it would profit you nothing. On this Juno was frightened, so she curbed her stubborn will and sat down in silence. But the heavenly beings were disquieted throughout the house of Jove, till the cunning workman Vulcan began to try and pacify his mother Juno. It will be intolerable, he said, if you two fall to wrangling and setting heaven in an uproar about a pack of mortals. If such ill counsels are to prevail, we shall have no pleasure at our banquet. Let me then advise my mother, and she must herself know that it will be better to make friends with my dear father Jove, lest he again scald her and disturb our feast. If the Olympian Thunderer wants to hurl us all from our seats, he can do so, for he is far the strongest. So give him fair words, and he will then soon be in good humor with us. As he spoke, he took a double cup of nectar and placed it in his mother's hand. "Cheer up, my dear mother," said he, "and make the best of it. I love you dearly, and should be very sorry to see you get a thrashing, however grieved I might be. I cannot help, for there is no standing against Jove. Once before, when I was trying to help you, he caught me by the foot and flung me from the heavenly threshold all day long, from morn till evening was I falling, till at sunset I came to the ground in the island of Lemnos, and there I lay, with very little life left in me, till the Sintians came and tended me." Juno smiled at this, and as she smiled, she took the cup from her son's hand. Then Vulcan drew sweet nectar from the mixing bowl and served it round among the gods, going from left to right. And the blessed gods laughed out a loud applause as they saw him bustling about the heavenly mansion. Thus, through the livelong day to the going down of the sun, they feasted, and every one had his full share, so that all were satisfied. Apollo struck his lyre, and the muses lifted up their sweet voices, calling and answering one another. But when the sun's glorious light had faded, they went home to bed, each in his own abode, which lame Vulcan with his consummate skill had fashioned for them. So Jove, the Olympian, lord of thunder, hied him to the bed, and in which he always slept, and when he had gone on to it, he went to sleep with Juno of the golden throne by his side. At the end of Book 1 of the Iliad, it's Hephaestus calming his mother, Hera, and giving her a cup of ambrosia, which we can understand probably some kind of mixing of blood or something of that nature. Because, well, ambrosia, what does it mean? It's ambi plus rosia, right, or rosia, and ambrosia. Well, it's said to make you undying, or literally probably means that the mixing of the blood makes you undead, right? Well, that we had to understand, right? If if Hephaestus, well, who is he? He's probably something like Naphtali, or he's like the tribe of Dan. So then he's from the handmaid Bylaa, right? That Bylaa is similar to this Belial, right? And it's like a handmaid, and that Rachel was worried that she wasn't having children, right? So then she gave it to the handmaid to make a child, right? And it's somewhat like you, right? But not quite, right? The child is somewhat different, and the child came from the Lord. The Lord brought it, right? That Dan and Naphtali were born because Rachel was jealous of Leah, or that she was upset because she wasn't having child and Leah was, right? And then Rosia, well, it probably means race, quite literally, or it means like to raise up, or rose, as in rose is like the past tense of raise, where raise is like raw, or priest, or a raise of the sun, basically. And then when priest, right, priest in just priest, it's like rhesus or something, right? Or it's like raise, or prayer in Greek. And then recall in the first book of Samuel, Hannah says that she has a drink, neither wine or strong spirit, but poured out her soul, and then she eats some bread. And then in the Greek myths, Hephaestus is somewhat of an enigma, right? Or at least how he is born, exactly, right? Because he's supposed to be asexually born from Hera, but how that happens, we're not quite sure, right? So the technology is quite literally like the son-in-law of being, or
married to man, or that invention, right, is kind of like is only born through necessity, or that right, that only it's only time that we need to invent new ways is that we do it. And a lot of times we we reach out to God, and then it's through this form of technology, right? It's like we were married to technology in that way. And then in the Enigma, right? So Hannah has a son. The Enigma, what is Samuel? It's the language. It's the good words, the good humor. So Hephaestus in the Iliad, Hephaestus explains that he was thrown down to Sintios, and then there's some etymology there, right? Which you can imagine is the Sinai Peninsula, or it's even like Mount Sinai, which has some significance to Jews in Egypt alike. So Naphtali, he's like the deer that's been caught and he's let go, and then he makes beautiful fawns, right? So that Hephaestus is sent down from Olympus, and then he's going to become the smithy god. He's going to make things for everybody. But he's also like Dan, right? That he's like a judge. He's going to pardon people, but he is also kind of related to everyone, somewhat, right? That he's kind of the kin of people. Then he's also when we say that he's like a judge, or that he pardons people, well, he has a mallet too, but that he pardons people, or that could also be, well, it's ambiguous because that when you say you pardon, it could also mean to thrust back, right? That Dan means that you're going to be thrust back by this snake, but then thrust back could also mean like that you've been let go or something, right? You've been thrown down. And that's kind of like Naphtali. So there's somewhat enigma. But in the end, we know that, well, fire is good for making things, but fire is also a very dangerous thing, and it'll thrust you back quite literally in many ways. So from Exodus 3, all right, so from Exodus 3, Moses at the burning bush. Meanwhile, Moses was shepherding the flock of his father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from within a bush. Moses saw the bush ablaze with fire, but it was not consumed. So Moses thought, I must go over and see this marvelous sight. Why is the bush not burning up? So this is like Hephaestus. He's kind of like this. Well, if you look up the name of actual Hephaestus, he's somewhat ambiguous. He's like an enigma. He's hard to figure out. He's both one thing and another, right? That he's incorruptible, but he is corruptible, right? That he's got this lame leg. It's like he's been hit by the mallet, right? Like metal, we understand that when you got to strike when the iron's hot, and then it's very, it's malleable, and then once it's kind of gone cold, that you can't do anything to it, right? That's the good thing about metal. It's very hard and rigid when it's been set in place. And then, well, again, that there's some ambiguity here that Naphtali, he's like caught in the bush or something. And then again, we understand that fire is kind of this odd thing, right? That Jethro, well, it probably means something like gather, and then gather itself, it means like a court, right? It's like Jethro, he kind of, well, he brings on the delegation of powers, right? That Moses, once Jethro comes back in Exodus, he has to give up his powers. And Jethro is kind of like, oh, he means court or something, or these like court of knights, basically. And that, well, again, some ambiguity that Dan means a judge, again, that he's like this judge. Here, and then going further, Horeb is like Mount Sinai, so that Hephaestus has been thrown down to Sintios, which etymologically is related to Sinai. And then Moses was leading the flocks of Jethro, and then when he saw the burning bush, that once again is like Hephaestus, right? It's just obviously it's fire. And then and then you could say it's almost like Eli is like talking to Hannah, and this you're going to give eventual birth to Samuel, because Eli or Helios is the son, but at this point we haven't got to this crossover in Samuel, right? Again, there's going to be a crossover where you're going to apply the negative to the truth, and that's going to be the birth of Samuel, what that signifies. And then, so at the end of the book, so going to the Iliad, at the end of the book 1 of the Iliad, they're having this party, right? And then they drink the ambrosia. And then it says the sun's going to go down, which again is going to be the allegory for this transformation of the value system, of the morality. And going further, Agamemnon is a hypocrite, or he's above the judges, and it's kind of Nestor, this knight of Gerene, they call him, or Gerene or something, and it's similar to Jethro in that role, in that he makes Agamemnon give up something in response to kind of taking everybody's stuff, right? That Agamemnon eventually does have to delegate some power, right? And that's to the Median people. And then likewise, Moses in Exodus is going to have to delegate some power. And that Nestor, well, he's known, they're hypocrites, because Nestor is known as kind of this like second face, where he's like the good cop to the bad cop of Agamemnon, right? And then the knight of Gerene is kind of like this epithet, something similar to the kind of the judges or something like Jethro, this gathering. And we know that fire, well, gathers people, but it's also going to thrust people back. It's a very ambiguous thing, fire, and it's got good and bad. And that we probably should realize the power in that, right? It's understand the whole meaning of fire, not just kind of good and not forget about the bad, right? Not that we want to be bad, but there's power in recognizing it, just for protective stances and such. And then again, Agamemnon isn't necessarily revealed to be a hypocrite, right? That's what he worries about most. He worries about losing his power ultimately, so he delegates it to kind of Nestor, and then ultimately he's still going to consolidate, or he's still going to be the top dog, right? He's going to be above the judges. He's going to be the hypocrite. And then Odysseus in the first two books of the Iliad, so he delegates to Nestor, and then eventually this all goes down to Odysseus. Odysseus is like the captain, right? And then we all see this play out in the first two books of the Iliad. It happens a lot, but we see it like, as an example in the first two books of the Iliad. And this happens after the breakup with Achilles. All that said, let's go back to the Bible from the first book of Samuel, chapter 1. The birth of Samuel. And they rose up in the early morning and worshipped before the Lord, and returned and came to their house to Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. Wherefore it came to pass, when the time was come about after Hannah had conceived, that she bare a son, and he called his name Samuel, saying, Because I have asked him of the Lord. And the man Elkanah and all his house went up to offer unto the Lord the yearly sacrifice and his vow. But Hannah went not up, for she said unto her husband, I will not go up until the child be weaned, and then I will bring him, that he may appear before the Lord, and there abide forever. And Elkanah her husband said unto her, Do what seemeth thee good. Tarry until thou have weaned him, only the Lord establish his word. So the woman abode, and gave her son suck until she weaned him. And when she had weaned him, she took him up with her with 3 bullocks and 1 ephah of flour and a bottle of wine, and brought him unto the house of the Lord in Shiloh. And the child was young. And they slew a bullock, and brought the child to Eli. And she said, O my Lord, as thy soul liveth, my Lord, I am the woman that stood by thee here, praying unto the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord hath given me my petition which I asked of him. Therefore also I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he liveth, he shall be lent to the Lord. And he worshipped the Lord there. So the birth of Samuel, it starts off that the sun rose, where both sun and, again, rose are homophones, because in chapter 1, Samuel 1, it's Samuel's born. Samuel meaning the sign of God, or the semantics of God. So I argue they share similarities with characters in the Iliad, right? That Nestor, he's this legitimizing force for Agamemnon. Nestor is somewhat similar to Hephaestus in that he is associated with fire and the comfort of fire and the gathering of fire, right? This judge, he's like that this knight of Gerene, this epithet is like Jethro. But he also kind of does resemble Athena, right? That he is ultimately like Aaron or something from the Exodus, or he's like Samuel, once again, from the book of Samuel. And that they're these Levites, the marshaling force, right, of respective myths. So whether you're the Greek or Israelites, right? So you need this combination of nostalgia, basically the fireside stories, the gathering, and then this strategy and discipline to have a formidable unit for fighting, right? Because ultimately, that somehow you're gonna have to take from others, right? And then how do you moralize that? Well, that's through nostalgia.
And once again, Samuel, like Nestor or Hephaestus, and even like the sun that is a light source. That fire provides light, and it also in combination provides heat, and this can be exchanged in replacement of the sun, which is the whole reason that things start in the first place. Remember, in both the Iliad and Odyssey, Homer says the reasons for the epics, it's because of Apollo. As far as like Hephaestus, well, he is raised by Eurynomy and Tethys, where Tethys it literally means tit or teat, and to suckle or wean, and Eurynomy means broad name or broad law. So perhaps that Hephaestus, right? He's the son-in-law of Zeus, or he's son in name only, and then Apollo represents the patriarchy that we don't really know anything about Apollo's mother, Leto, right? We just know that he was born from Leto. There's some myths about it, but it's not really explicated in really in that much detail in many myths, right? But like all the myths are about Zeus, so we know everything about Apollo's father, right? And then through Zeus and Apollo, we know the myths them together, right? That Zeus sends Apollo, or that Apollo is in the myths because of his father. And then Hephaestus, we know everything about his mother, right? But we don't really know much about Hephaestus. He's kind of, again, like a tool. He's just kind of needed. When they need him, he plays his part. But there's some there, right? We had to flesh it out. That's the thing about Homer, that the myths are there. We have to be the one to kind of understand it and say it in more plain terms. So, again, they're kind of the same but different, right? That there's like this wordplay going on. We have Tethys, Thetis, and then we have the sun, and then sun. So these are very like general homophones, but there's something very like powerful that they're at the foundation of the myths. So additionally, that Hera is white-armed, right? That she says that the word is leontos, or it's white or bright, or it could even mean like a lion. And then Hannah, she says that she lends her son to the Lord, or again, Lent is past tense of lend. And then we also know that Lent, right, starts on Ash Wednesday, and in the Christian myths, to commemorate the 40 days that Jesus spent abroad in the desert. He was fasting. And again, everyone, this reoccurring theme to be casted out, and then you're kind of like on this deserted place or something, and that you come back. And that Jesus even is like Hephaestus, that we don't really know much about his youth. We just know he was born, and then he kind of has a trade, and then he comes back, and he's like the son of God. All of a sudden we have to worship him or something. Which again, it's like Zeus throwing out Hephaestus. So let's move further into the first book of Samuel. Hannah's prayer of thanksgiving. And Hannah prayed and said, "My heart rejoiceth in the Lord. Mine horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth is enlarged over mine enemies, because I rejoice in thy salvation. There is none holy as the Lord, for there is none besides thee, neither is there any rock like our Lord. Talk no more so exceeding proudly. Let no arrogancy come out of your mouth, for the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty men are broken, and they that stumble are girded with strength, that they that were full have hired out themselves for bread, and that they were hungry ceased, so that the barren hath borne 7, and that she hath had many children is waxed feeble. The Lord killeth and maketh alive. He bringeth down to the grave and bringeth up. The Lord maketh poor and maketh rich. He bringeth low and lifteth up. He raiseth up the poor out of the dust, and lifteth up the beggar from the dunghill, to set them among princes, and to make them inherit the throne of glory. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and he shall set the world upon them. He will keep the feet of his saints, and the wicked shall be silent in darkness, for by strength shall no man prevail. The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken to pieces. Out of heaven shall he thunder upon them. The Lord shall judge the edges of the earth, and he shall give strength unto his king, and exalt the horn of his anointed. And Elkanah went to Ramah to his house, and
as the child did minister unto the Lord before Eli the priest. The will of the Lord, or Zeus, is the superposition. Right? Zeus is the will, or what is possible. We know it as probability. He can lift the poor up and the rich down. That's theoretically possible, right? Although it's unlikely, right? It doesn't frequently happen. Although it could, theoretically. It is probable. Or there is a probability to it. It's not likely, or it's not more likely than not, I should say. We can also think of Achilles as the will of Zeus and his fortunes and misfortunes during the Trojan War. Right? No one sent more people down to Hades, and that he caused grief among the Achaeans and Trojans alike, and there was arguments. Right? Basically, people were arguing over him, and Agamemnon and him had an argument, and they raised the dead. Right? That argument, it means to raise the dead or the earth. But also, he himself will come down, and the others, as a result, will benefit. Right? The small people benefit from this happening. Right? That because Achilles leaves, the other people have to pick up the slack. There's more to it in that the Lord, or Agamemnon, is the son of Atreus, right? Along with Menelaus, they're called the son of Atreus, and they are cursed. Their family is cursed. You would know, right? You would know if you read the Oresteia, right, by Aeschylus, that Agamemnon is Agamemnon, after he gets back from the the Trojan War, he's killed. Well, some say he's killed in his bathtub by his wife and her lover because of the curse of Atreus, but also because he sacrificed the daughter Iphigenia just to get to Troy in the first place, right? And it was like what we call a bloodbath, right? When he gets back to Mycenae, it's a bloodbath. But at the end of the day, we shouldn't throw the baby out, right, with the bathwater. It's all because of the hubris of Agamemnon, that in the Iliad he steals Briseis, and then Achilles goes off and he cries to his mom to go talk to Zeus. And I think while this happens, Zeus is off in Ethiopia, where Ethiopia, it means burned eyes or fire eyes, or could even mean dark eyes, which again is like a dark sun or sun, right? It's dark S-O-N. And of course, when we know that when you look at the sun, it burns your eyes or something, right? That you end up probably with this bad vision, and that the sun shines light on everything, but it can also take away everything, right? Our ability to see over time. And our ability to see is what gives us the ability to observe or understand truth in the world, especially if it's all about symbols and you're following the sun. And then we also kind of know this, right, in practical sense, that scientific purposes, right? Think of the chemist who dies of poisoning, right, after they have this huge breakthrough in their field, but they end up dying because they poison themselves. Again, to raise the dead, it's another term that is used as well as it was to argue, or argos, which is another term for Mycenae, where Mycenae was the city which Agamemnon ruled over, and he was the hegemon of the Mycenaean culture. Agamemnon was the leader of all the Greek tribes, this vast confederation. He wasn't just king over one little city or something. Also, Agamemnon was known for his treasure, right? Most famously, that Schliemann, he found the tomb of Agamemnon, or what he thought was, right, in the city of Mycenae, and that he literally raised the dead. He argued that it was what it was, and it was true, right? He put his money where his mouth was. Then a common word, you'll see this in the King James version of the Bible, is tarry, T-A-R-R-Y. It's used also in the Iliad, some translation. It's a word. It means to argue or to linger or to raise the dead, kind of, right? Or it could be another word for argos, right? Or the argive. At the closing of Book 1 in the Iliad, there's a mention that there's a feast for Oceanus and Tethys. And because it said they haven't laid together, and that Zeus, he's going to be there for 12 days. And then if we're looking for an analogy in the book of Samuel, there's the number 12, so it's like a yearly sacrifice. And then we know that Hera doesn't go down to Ethiopia, and there's this, well, we understand possibly this birth of Hephaestus, or Hephaestus. He appears in the Iliad at the end of Book 1, and he's this fire god. And again, Ethiopia is this burned face, burned eyes. So I think it's important probably to go a little bit more into the curse of Agamemnon. So the most straightforward account, right, is besides reading Aeschylus, is to go into Apollodorus. Pelops, which again it could mean dark eye. It's kind of similar to Ethiopia. After being slaughtered and boiled at the banquet of the gods, was fairer than ever when he came to life again, and on account of his surpassing beauty he became a minion of Poseidon, who gave him a winged chariot, such that even when it ran through the sea, the axles were not wet. Now, Oenemos, the king of Pisa, had a daughter, Hippodomia, and whether it was that he loved her, or some say that he was warned by an oracle that he must die by the man that married her, no man got her to wife, for her father could not persuade her to cohabit with him, and her suitors were put by him to death. For he had arms and horses given him by Ares, and he offered a prize to the suitors, the hand of his daughter, and each suitor was bound to take up Hippodomia on his chariot and flee as far as the isthmus of Corinth, and Oenemos straightway pursued him in full armor, and if he overtook him, he slew him. But if the suitor were not overtaken, he was to have Hippodomia his wife. And in this way he slew many suitors, some say 12, and he cut off the heads of the suitors and nailed them to his house. So Pelops also came a-wooing, and when Hippodomia saw his beauty, she conceived a passion for him, and persuaded Myrtilus, son of Hermes, to help him, for Myrtilus was charioteer to Oenemos. Accordingly, Myrtilus, being in love with her and wishing to gratify her, did not insert the linchpins in the boxes of her wheels, and thus caused Oenemos to lose the race and to be entangled in the reins and dragged to death. But according to some, he was killed by Pelops, and dying he cursed Myrtilus, whose treachery he had discovered, praying that he might perish by the hand of Pelops. Pelops therefore got Hippodomia, and on his journey, in which he was accompanied by Myrtilus, he came to a certain place and withdrew a little to fetch water for his wife, who was athirst, and in the meantime Myrtilus tried to rape her. But when Pelops learned that from her, he threw Myrtilus into the sea, called after him the Myrtoan Sea at Cape Gerestheus. And Myrtilus, as he was being thrown, uttered curses against the house of Pelops. When Pelops had reached the ocean and had been cleansed by Hephaestus, he returned to Pisa and Hellas, and succeeded to the kingdom of Oenemos, but not until he had subjugated what was formerly called Appia and Palastiotis, which he called Peloponnesus after himself. The signs of Pelops were Pythias, Atreus, Thyestes, the sons of Pelops. The sons of Pelops, not the signs. See, I've even got lost in the semantics. The sons of Pelops were Pythias, Atreus, Thyestes, and others. Now the wife of Atreus was Aerope, daughter of Catreus, and she loved Thyestes, and Atreus once vowed to sacrifice to Artemis the finest of his flocks, but when a golden lamb appeared, they say that he neglected to perform his vow, and having choked the lamb, he deposited it in a box and kept it there. And Aerope gave it to Thyestes, by whom she had been debauched, for the Mysians had received an oracle which bade them choose a Pelopid for their king, and they had sent for Atreus and Thyestes. And when a discussion took place concerning the kingdom, Thyestes declared to the multitude that the kingdom ought to belong to who owned the golden lamb. And when Atreus agreed, Thyestes produced the lamb, and he was made king. But Zeus sent Hermes to Atreus and told him to stipulate with Thyestes that Atreus should be king if the sun should go backward. And when Thyestes agreed, the sun set in the east. Hence the deity having plainly attested the usurping of Thyestes, Atreus got the kingdom and banished Thyestes. But afterwards, being apprised of the adultery, he sent a herald to Thyestes with a proposal for accommodation. And when he had lured Thyestes by a pretense of friendship, he slaughtered the sons Aglaus, Callileon, and Orchomenos or Orchomenus, whom Thyestes had by a Naiad nymph, though they had sat down as suppliants on the altar of Zeus, and having cut them limb from limb and boiled them, he served them up to Thyestes without the extremities. And when Thyestes had eaten them heartily of them, He showed him the extremities and cast them out of the country. But seeking by all means to pay Atreus out, Thyestes inquired of the oracle on the subject, and received an answer that it could be done if he were to beget a son by intercourse with his own daughter. He did so accordingly, and begat Aegisthus by his daughter. And Aegisthus, when he was grown to manhood, and had learned that he was the son of Thyestes, killed Atreus and restored the kingdom to Thyestes. But the nurse took Agamemnon and Menelaus to Polyphetes, lord of Sion, who again sent them to Aeneas the Aetolian. Not long afterwards, Tyndareus brought them back again, and they drove away Thyestes to dwell in Cytherea after they had taken an oath to him at the altar of Hera to which he had fled, and they became the son-in-laws to Tyndareus by marrying his daughters Agamemnon, getting Clytemnestra to wife after he had slain her spouse Tantalus, the son of Thyestes, together with his newborn babe, while Menelaus got Helen. And Agamemnon reigned over the Mycenaeans and married Clytemnestra, daughter of Tyndareus, after slaying her. Okay, it's just repeating. After slaying her former husband Tantalus, son of Thyestes, with his child, and there were born to Agamemnon his son Orestes, and daughter Chrysothemis, Electra, and Iphigenia. And Menelaus married Helen and reigned over Sparta, Tyndareus having ceded the kingdom to him. So all that. So a long story short, Atreus, he lured his brother Thyestes to his house, and then he fed Thyestes his children because, he killed them and chopped them up into pieces before Thyestes arrived at his house. And there's like a little bit to these stories, right? So we kind of do this today, right? When we feed children, we tell them what we did, our parents did them. We tell them these stories we heard, and then we do these kind of like babbling and funny noises, right? Like, the most famous, right? Here comes the airplane and such. And then we also associate like, children, they have like these alphabet soups and such. Also, in Greek, human means homos, right? A homo sapien is like a human. And then homos, it means same, or it means like a shoulder or a joint. And that a homophone, it joins sounds, right? Or it's like this junction of sounds. Or that it can make multiple fittings for a word, for the root. So Jewish symbology says that they can't eat, or they know that they not to eat the joint meat, right? It said in Genesis that they're not supposed to eat this shoulder or the joint meat, and to be kosher, right? Again, it's not to eat that meat. Furthermore, Poseidon or Athena, right? They're both kind of associated with the number 3, with the trident or the 3-pronged fork. Just in general, there's a lot of their mythology which is disputed or kind of argued over. Whether it was Athena or Poseidon who was the progenitor of the this or that, right? There's an archaic form, and then there's the Athenian form. And the horse, for example, this Hippodomia, the tamer of horses, whether it was Athena or Poseidon is debated, right? And it's because of this ambiguity and this semantics, right? So in the Greek or Jewish myths, when they say shoulder meat, like in Samuel 1, the meat is pronged by a fork, so that could possibly be that Poseidon, right, which I see as analogous to as Reuben, right, the tribe of Reuben in Genesis, the son of Jacob, right. That the story of Reuben is that he's not allowed to get the blessing, right, of the firstborn because he has gone onto the couch of his father, right. He's defiled it, and that he is skipped over for the Levites, and the Levites themselves become corrupt in time of Eli, and it's most likely that it's because they become worshiping Zeus and Apollo, right? These pagan gods, and so they have to make Hephaestus has to be born, this new son of God, right? And the shoulder meat, the shoulder meat could also mean some like cannibalism, right? That if shoulder means humans and you're eating shoulder meat, you're going to eat humans, right? I mean, you could take it quite literally. Perhaps that's what happens to Cain and Abel, right? The lesson was not to fight. It was maybe like about cannibalism, but we shouldn't get caught up in all these like brotherly feuds, right? We can't fight our ancestors' battles, right? We have to have some peace within ourselves. But moving on from the first book of Samuel, chapter 2, the sins of Eli's sons. Now the sons of Eli were the sons of Belial. They knew not the Lord, and the priest's customs with the people was that when any man sacrificed, the priest's sons came while the flesh was in seething, with a flesh hook of 3 teeth in his hand, and he struck it into the pan, or kettle, or cauldron, or pot. All that the flesh hook brought up, the priest took for himself. So they did in Shiloh, until all the Israelites that came thither. Also, before they burned the fat, the priest's servant came and said to the man that sacrificed, Give flesh to roast for the priest, for he will not have sodden flesh of thee, but raw. And if any man said unto him, Let them not fail to burn the fat presently, and then take as much as thy soul desireth, then he would answer him, Nay, but thou shalt give it me now, and if not, I will take it by force. Wherefore the sin of the young men was very great before the Lord, and for men abhorred the offering of the Lord. But Samuel ministered before the Lord, being a child, girded with a linen ephod. Moreover, his mother made him a little coat, and brought it to him from year to year, when she came up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. And Eli blessed Elkanah and his wife, and said, The Lord give thee seed of this woman for the loan which is lent to the Lord. And they went on to their own home. And the Lord visited Hannah, so that she conceived, and bare 3 sons and 2 daughters. And the child Samuel grew before the Lord. Again, Thyestes' children are killed and fed to him by Atreus. And then the word homos in Greek means man and joint. And in the Iliad, they'll say that Agamemnon, he threw his cloak over his shoulder, and then he put on his sandals. And that's kind of similar wording to Moses and Abraham. It could be like this mentioned to man-eating, but also this kind of curse and ancestors and stuff. And that, well, what a lot of fighting was over, right? Stealing other people's wealth and stuff. It was a lot of infighting within the family of aristocrats. Furthermore, it's Poseidon who adopts Pelops, essentially after he's boiled what's called the banquet of the gods, and he's served as food. And Poseidon, the one with the trident, and Poseidon, right, he's the one who has the trident. He gives him a chariot that can't get wet, or like the meat. Maybe it means like the meat isn't boiled, right? It's still raw, as said in Samuel. Then you combine the fact with like Zeus, he also means to seethe or to boil, right? He's a very angry god, but quite literally his Zeus, there's forms of his name that means seethe or boil. The myth goes that Atreus, well, he didn't sacrifice a golden lamb to Artemis, but he put it in a box. Now, Atreus could mean 3 or a third, so maybe, right, he kept a third for himself or something. Well, I say 3 because Atreus, well, it means means not to flee, right? But in reality, it probably has to do with well, like in the Bible, they describe that like I think it's in Numbers or Deuteronomy or something, that there's 3 cities, right? And then one of those cities should be for fleeing, right? That if somebody has done something, that they should have a place to flee to, right? And there's 3 cities, right? Is like the theme. So, right, maybe he's made up of 3s, Atreus, right? I mean, a tray, or he's like a 3 or a third or something. Thyestes, the brother of Atreus, he means pestle, for grinding, right? So he's probably associated with Moloch and also like stews, right? He might just mean like a stew or something. And then again, it's making sacrifices, and again, the sacrifice, it wasn't done right, and again, that is like analogous to Samuel, where the sons of Eli are cursed because they're not doing the sacrifices right. They're like, they're kind of being arrogant and such. Where they talk about the Levites, well, we know the Levites are cursed too, right? So they would take the meat without giving it its proper religious rites, and they would not letting it boil or seethe the fat. They would want it raw. And then if you look at the etymology of Artemis, it means like season or to season or become seasons, right? So these all mean something and entirely themselves too. They weren't doing the proper religious sacraments. They weren't seasoning the meat right or something maybe. Or they were taking some for themselves before the fact, and as a result, right, they found themselves in this kind of internal conflict, right? It could be that, well, that leads to military stuff, that they become a seasoned veteran. And then season, of course, also has to do with tracking time, that the sun was probably originally the first tracker of time, that that we related time with the sun, that it sets, it rises, that's a day, and then there's multiple days in a year, right? And the year is separated into days, but it's also seasons, right? One of the ways we separate time is seasons. Or the first God, well, we know from the Bible it says God, well, he said, let there be light. That's one of the first incidences in the Bible. Moreover, in the beginning of Book 2 of the Iliad, Agamemnon, he puts on a fresh new shirt. And then we know Samuel, he gets a fresh shirt every year from his mom, right? So in Greek, it's called negatios. Negatios, I'm guessing, it's like negation. Well, it means newly made. It's somewhat unclear, though, if here, right, like Agamemnon is more like the Lord or Samuel. But I think it's that, well, Nestor is the one who kind of brings the sign of Agamemnon, but Agamemnon himself is the Lord, and that means that they're probably worshiping something like the moon at this time, right? That he puts on a fresh new shirt, this Lord or this God, Agamemnon. That God, right? He's like higher than the Lord, who communicates through Samuel or signs. Again, it could be that the fresh shirt is the beginning of the lunar monthly cycle, or it's like a brand new full moon. And that there are competing calendars for tracking time and year. And then we know, well, going further back in the Sumerian mythology or the Akkadian mythology, Sin was the god of the moon, or associated with the crescent moon in Sumerian mythology. And we know in modern religions, right, that the moon, well, the crescent moon is associated with Islam. It's a symbol. Well, it's basically the symbol for Islam. Furthermore, it's Nestor, right, who appears to Agamemnon in the dream. He's the sign, and Agamemnon asks for him first. After the dream is over, he asks for Nestor first to confer, and then they sit with the elders, and they all sit next to Nestor's ship. And Nestor, well, he's the sign of God. He's this legitimizing force. He's right that we can't just say God exists. There has to be something that heuristic we can say, right? That myth itself is somewhat of a mathematical language, or there's mathematics embedded within it, because you worship nature, which is purely like, or can be described through mathematics, right? So it's one and the same. Then, but also Nestor is kind of related to fire, right? That he gathers people, is related to the judges and courts and such. And then Samuel is related to all that as well, right? And then Agamemnon, well, he's like the Lord, right? That the Lord, well, the Lord is God or something. He's somewhat ambiguous. Well, I don't know how to say it, ambiguous, but he's Yahweh, but we call him the Lord, right? In the English language or the Bible. From the first book of Samuel, Eli reproves his sons. Now Eli was very old and heard all that his sons did unto Israel, and how they lay with the woman that assembled at the door of the tabernacle of their congregation. And he said unto them, Why do ye such things? For I hear of your evil dealings by all this people. Nay, my sons, for it is no good report that I hear ye make the Lord's people to transgress. If one man sin against another, the judge shall judge him. But if a man sin against the Lord, who shall entreat for him? Notwithstanding they hearkened not unto the voice of their father, because the Lord would slay them. And the child Samuel grew on, and was in favor both with the Lord and also with men. A prophecy against Eli's house. And there came a man of God unto Eli, and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord, Did I plainly appear unto the house of thy father, when they were in Egypt in Pharaoh's house? And I had chosen him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to offer upon mine altar, to burn incense, to wear an ephod before me. And did I give unto the house of thy father all the offerings made by fire of the children of Israel? Wherefore kick ye at my sacrifice, and at mine offering which I have commanded in my habitation. And honourest thy sons above me, to make yourselves fat with the chiefest of all the offerings of Israel my people. Wherefore the Lord God of Israel said, I said indeed that thy house and the house of thy father should walk before me forever. But now the Lord saith, Be it far from me, for them that honour me I will honour, and they that despise me shall be lightly esteemed. Behold, the days come that I will cut off thine arm and the arm of thy father's house, and there shall not be an old man in thine house, and thou shalt see an enemy in my habitation, and all the wealth which God shall give Israel. And thou shalt be not an old man in thine house forever, and the man of thine whom I shall not cut off from mine altar shall be to consume thine eyes, and to grieve thine heart, and all the increase of thine houses shall die in the flower of their age. And this shall be a sign unto thee that shall come upon thy sons on Hophni and Phinehas, and one day they shall die, both of them, and I will raise me up a faithful priest that shall do according to that which is mine heart and in my mind. And I will build him a sure house, and he shall walk before mine, and anointed forever. And it shall come to pass that every one that is left in thine house shall come and crouch to him for a piece of silver and a morsel of bread, and shall say, Put me, I pray to thee, into one of the priest's offices, that I may eat a piece of bread. The Levites are cursed, and Agamemnon, well, he's a Levite, so he's cursed as well, the line of Atreus. Nestor, like Samuel, is kind of the priest of Agamemnon, or that he legitimizes him. He's able to give the right words for these signs appearing, right? It's not just good enough that the moon, that it's a full moon. You need somebody to make sense of it. In Book 2, it's Agamemnon who calls for Nestor, and it says, he gets up when done, and then he sits down, which, well, it reminds me of Athena and the Levites from the Old Testament of Jewish mythology, that, well, Athena, she brings the troops out, and then she brings them back safely, right? She gets them to sit up, and then she sits them down. And this is all done safely, according to the Homeric hymns, and then, of course, the Iliad, right? Actual Homeric epic. And it's Nestor that gets up and sits back down, or gets everyone to sit down by the ships to listen to Agamemnon, the elders. And you could say, oh, that's kind of like a fire, or you could say that he is kind of something like a... right, he gathers people like a fire, right? He's a knight of Gerene. He's like this Jethro, or this guy. He tells Moses to delegate his power. Or you can say that Nestor, well, he's kind of like a Levite, right? He's like Aaron. He's like a Levite, and it makes sense, right? That Nestor is himself. Then he has the epithet son of Neleus, but then he also has the epithet knight of Gerene, right? So again, it's this just, well, it's symbols, but either it's a word or the word itself is related to a host of images and all kinds of like ideas. The word sigkaleo or something, it means to call, right, or to convene. It's like, well, it's like in the Bible where the Lord calls Samuel, and I imagine it's probably something like a sign, or maybe even like a synagogue or something like this, or a signal. So let's read further from the Bible. From chapter 2, the book of Samuel, the first book of Samuel. The Lord called Samuel, and the child Samuel ministered unto the Lord before Eli, and the word of the Lord was precious in those days. There was no open vision. And it came to pass at that time, when Eli was laid down in his place, and his eyes began to wax dim, that he could not see. And ere the lamp of God went out in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of the God was, and Samuel was laid down to sleep, that the Lord called Samuel, and he answered, Here I am. And he ran unto Eli, and said, Here am I, for thou callest me. And he said, I called not. And he said, I called not, lie down again. And he went and he lied down. And the Lord called yet again, Samuel said. And Samuel arose and went to Eli and said, Here am I, for thou didst call me. And he answered, I called not, my son, lie down again. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and neither was the word of the Lord yet revealed upon him. And the Lord called Samuel again the third time. And he arose and went to Eli and said, Here am I, for thou didst call me. And Eli perceived that the Lord had called the child. Therefore Eli said unto Samuel, Go lie down, and it shall be, if he call thee, that thou shalt say, Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Right. So at the end of the book 1, the Iliad, the sun sets with all the gods sleeping in beds made by Hephaestus. But it's Zeus who stays awake, and he sends this lying dream down to Agamemnon, and it's in the form or the sign of Nestor. And in the Bible, when the Lord calls Samuel, he comes to Eli, that the son at that point was still God. And of course, Samuel, he represents this transformation of Nestor, or this transformation of the system of values or morality or mythology, right? That Samuel, it says at the end that Samuel went and laid down in his place, and that place is who? It's Eli, or God, or the son. And then we understand that Nestor is like Samuel, and that he's going to be this kind of like, it's going to be like the character who's going to kind of play this role. and he gets people to get up and then sit down. And likewise, right, it's like the elders who sit down beside the ship, right, in the book, in the Iliad. And then there's a Greek word for this, for sit. It's kathaso, right? So kathaso, I would argue, is like Catholic, or maybe even like a cathedral in the context, right, of the two books, right? It's in Samuel or Nestor, that they literally get people to sit up or to sit down. This kind of like a sign of the Lord. And Samuel, who understood by the third day or something, he understands that what it means, right? That the sun itself is like a symbol. It's not necessarily just this object, right? That there's something to be made out of it. And it's Agamemnon, the Lord, that convenes or calls first, right? He's the one that will be this kind of like, well, he's obviously what it is, right? He is this Lord or being, and then you need a sign or something to make of it, and then you have this kind of God or religion, and then you can make priests and disciples from it, that you could grow from it. But it has to be, well, you have to have some truth to it, right? Or maybe the opposite of that has to be like the negation of truth. It's like this mirror. There's also another word, Greek, that's interesting, that's kind of used in this, they're used in proximity, these two words, kathaso, and then it's idrio, which translates make to sit down or to seat. So combining these two words, like to make someone sit down in a seat, you could say it's like a cathedral, right? It's kathaso and this idrio. Or you could say that made idrio is more like hydra, right? The Greek monster. It's interesting, like in the New Testament also, there's the character Andrew, right? He's one of the 12 apostles. And then there's another word too. It's hemathoisis, or hematoisis somewhat. It means sandy, but it could, well, sandy in that Nestor, right? In the context of the Iliad, it's in reference to Nestor. He's from Pylos, or Pylos. Well, Pylos is literally like a pile of rocks, right? A pylon or something. It's a pile. And that the sand is another symbol that's used in the Bible too as well. And, well, the name itself is similar to Matthew, right? Where we get some of the testament of Jesus' life. Meanwhile, Eli, who we can identify again as his son, Eli, or Helios, well, he's training Samuel, who will eventually come to replace him as the son of the Lord. The semantic will replace the worship of the sun, right? Helios, or Eli eventually is going to die. His eyes, well, they don't work anymore, which again is a common theme in the Bible with the prophets as the age. And, well, in reality, every person's eyes go out. And then relating this to the Greek myths, well, the sun, at the end of the Iliad, again, they go to Ethiopia, and this means like this burnt eyes or burnt face. So perhaps that Eli again is the sun, and then right that Apollo, he for 10 days he has this plague for 10 days, and then they have this huge feast, and they have a party, and then that Achilles during this he's crying, and then Achilles sends his mom off to Zeus, but Zeus himself is away for a feast in Ethiopia, right? And the story goes that the Olympians, well, they go there to hope that they can get Oceanus and Tethys to sleep together again. This philos, right, together, this love, or phile or philos, right, just kind of on top of each other. And this sounds exactly like Philistine. I think we could understand it, right, that Philistine and philos are probably some of the same thing. They mean like friendship or fealty, right? That the Philistines are always kind of lying on top of the Israelites, right? But a lot of time they're not. They're like in conflict, right? They don't get along. Sometimes they are able to, but a lot of times they can't, right? They can't get along. The Bible is about them like trying to kill the Philistines. And then Hector, well, he can be identified as the Ark of the Covenant. And Achilles, the covenant itself, where the Greek troops are, well, they're scared of Hector because the Myrmidons have retreated from battle. And then Hector himself is going to be the best warrior left. But that it's not, the Ark has left and he's with the Philistines, right? The fealty is no longer there on their side. And then the myth of Thyestes and Atreus, the golden lamb, right? He's not sacrificed to Artemis, but buried. And Atreus, well, Atreus at first thinks it's he who has the golden lamb, but in reality, the woman Erope took it and gave it to Thyestes, right? And who ends up producing the golden lamb
and then he becomes the king of the Mycenaeans. And then Ram itself it means like Arna, right? It's similar to Ark. But if you read Apollodorus, well, the Greek is kind of interesting. It says like exontha thane, Arna thane, cruciane. So it's like something like to bear the following lamb of gold. But then it's like thin, right? There's 10 ornaments or something of gold, right? Which is like the 10 golden art pieces that must be sent from the Philistines with the ark in Samuel. So let's get back to the book of Samuel, chapter 6. The ark returns to Israel. And the ark of the Lord was in the country of the Philistines 7 months, and the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners, saying, What shall we do to the ark of the Lord? Tell us wherewith we shall send it to his place. And they said, If ye send away the ark of the God of Israel, send it not empty, but in any wise return him a trespass offering. Then ye shall be healed, and it shall be known to you why his hand is not removed from you. Then said thee, What shall be the trespassing offering which we shall return to him? They answered, 5 golden emerods and 5 golden mice, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines. For one plague was on you all and on your lords, wherefore ye shall make images of your emerods and make images of your mice that mar the land, and ye shall give glory unto the God of Israel. Peradventure he will lighten his hand from off you and from off your gods and from off your land. Wherefore then do ye harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts. When he had wrought wonderfully among them, did they not let the people go, and they departed? Now therefore make a new cart, and make 2 milch kine, on which there hath come no yoke, and tie the kine to the cart, and bring their caps home from them. And take the ark of the Lord, and lay it upon the cart, and put the jewels of gold which ye return for him for a trespassing offering, and in a coffer by the side thereof, and send it away that it may go, and see if it go up by the way his own coast to Beth Shemesh. Then he hath done us this great evil. But if not, then we shall know that it is not his hand that smote us; it was a chance that had happened to us. And then the men did so, and took the 2 milch kine and tied them to the cart, and shut up their calves at home. And they laid the ark of the Lord upon the cart, and with the coffer, with the mice of gold and the images of their emerods, and the kine took straight away to the way of Bethshemesh, and went along the highway, lowing as they went, and turned not aside to the right or to the left. And the Lord of the Philistines went after them unto the border of Bethshemesh. And they of Bethshemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley, and they lifted up their eyes and saw the ark, and rejoiced to see it. And the cart came unto the field of Joshua Beth Shemite, and stood there where there was a great stone. And they clave the wood of the cart, and offered a kine, a burnt offering unto the Lord. And the Levites took down the ark of the Lord, and the coffer that was with it, whereon the jewels of gold were, and put them on the great stone. And the men of Beth Shemesh offered burnt offering and sacrifice the same day unto the Lord. And when the 5 lords of the Philistines had seen it, they returned to Ekron the same day. And these are the golden emerods which the Philistines returned for a trespass offering unto the Lord for Ashdod, 1 for Gaza, 1 for Askelon, 1 for Gath, 1 for Ekron, 1. And the golden mice, according to the number of all the cities of the Philistines, belonging to the 5 lords, both of fenced cities and of country villages, even unto the great stone of Abel, whereon they set down the ark of the Lord, which the stone remaineth unto this day in the field of Joshua the Bethshemite. And he smote the men of Bethshemesh, because they had looked unto the ark of the Lord, when he smote. Even he smote of the people 50,000 and 60 men. And the people lamented, because the Lord had smitten many of the people with a great slaughter. And the men of Bethshemesh said, Who is able to stand before this holy Lord God, and to whom shall he go up from us? And they sent messengers to the inhabitants of Kira Jatherjearim, saying, The Philistines have brought again the ark of the Lord. Come ye down, and fetch it up to you. When Apollo comes down in the first book of the Iliad, he sends a plague for 9 days, and then on the 10th day he is appeased finally. And of course, Apollo is known for his epithet, he's known as the mouse, or the one from Smith, to be a tiny mouse, basically. And it's, again, like in the book of Samuel, the first book,
it's like the golden images that the Philistines are asked to make for the Israelites when they return the ark. And the ark is also returned with 5 golden emerods, or the if you look up emerald, I didn't know this, but it's a it's a hemorrhoid. So it's like golden hemorrhoids, and the ark, well, it comes back and it's pulled by this oxen, right? And well, in the Iliad, Nestor and Agamemnon, they're called this Hippodomia, the tamer of horses, right? And then it's Odysseus. Well, he puts this huge welt on the back of Thersites in the second book. And then a hemorrhoid, there are sores on your backside, or the anus, or butt, which can be caused by carrying heavy objects often. So, like, if you're carrying around the ark, they may have gotten hemorrhoids. And then the taming of horses or like oxen or bulls, well, it allows the ark to be transferred around, right, by an animal. It's also interesting that Hector is I understand Hector as the Ark of the Covenant, and he's also called the tamer of horses as well, right? He says Hippodomia, or the meter. He's like this the tamer of the horses, right? It's literally like the last words that are written in the Iliad. And then there's more to it, right? That you be wise, right? Not to put a big mark or a big target, right? A big red target on the back of on your back, basically. That, well, sometimes it's better to obey exactly, right? Not to go left, not to go right, to go straight, narrow path, right? Again, there's the debate between the origins of horse domestication, whether it was Poseidon or Athena. And then this could be related to the blessings of Reuben and the Levites. The Reubenites are passed over for the Levites, that Poseidon is the oldest and more archaic, or he's the Arcadian, and Athena, the newer Athenian goddess. And then furthermore, Philistine, it translates to loyalty of men, which is what the whole Iliad is about. It's about legitimacy and power. And in the book 2 of the Iliad, there's a crisis of legitimacy for Agamemnon, or maybe he feels his power is slipping away because Achilles, his most powerful warrior or ally, has left his side, right? So the beating that Thersites takes after Apollo's plagues causes everyone to jump back on board with Agamemnon in the Greek cause, right? Everyone's wiser, right? Going further, Israel demands a king, and it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judge over Israel. Now the name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second was Abiah. They were judges in Beersheba, and his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre, and took bribes, and perverted judgment. Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together, and came to Samuel unto Ramah, and said unto him, Behold, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed unto the Lord, and the Lord said unto Samuel, Hearken unto the voice of the people and all that they say unto thee, for they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. According to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them out of Egypt unto this day, wherewith they have forsaken me, and served other gods, so they do unto me. Now therefore hearken unto their voice. Howbeit ye protest solemnly on them, and show them the manner of the king that shall reign over them. Well, so there's a lot of semantics here. Again, Samuel, right, he gathers people, and then there's this Ramah, and it's like always that they go to Ramah, everyone goes to their own house in Ramah, and that's like Hephaestus. Hephaestus, he makes people comfortable. He allows people to have fires and buildings, right, and technology, so people are comfortable, and everyone has their own house. There's like somewhat of a middle class, and then when you have a middle class, you need to delegate power, right? That you can't just control a bunch of idiots, right? That you have kind of these middle class people who have some sense of agency, right? They might even have tools themselves. They might be a labor class. So when they say that he gathers all the elders, right? That is like Nestor. It's like Hephaestus. There's this fire. Remember that Nestor, his epithet is the knight of Gerene, right? Or this gatherer, like Jethro and Exodus. And then they always say like hearken or hearth, right? It's like a hearth or a fire. And then there's also this art, or the sense that the art is old, right? That they need new art. Now, this could be that things change in style and that you need to change the laws and such. But also that, like, rain, it means, like, literally that raw, or the sky or the sun, that it rains down, right? That it was the god, right? Or that people maybe started worshiping Apollo, the Israelites, that they started worshiping in that Samuel, right? That he wanted to control the opposition, so you give them Saul, right? Which is kind of like this. He's like Apollo, but he's not quite, right? Like Menelaus is not Apollo. Apollo is Apollo, right? That Eli, or this Helios, the sun, right, is the symbol of Apollo. And then again, that rain or raw or raise or art, these are all kind of similar words, right? They start with this AR, or, well, and then reading further, Samuel's warning about kings. And Samuel told all the words of the Lord unto the people that asked of him a king. And he said, This will be the manner of the king that shall reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for himself for his chariots and to be his horsemen. And some shall run before his chariots, and he will appoint him captains over thousands and captains over 50s, and will set them to ear his ground and to reap his harvest and to make his instruments of war and instruments of his chariots. And he will take your daughters to be your confectioners and to be your cooks and to be bakers. And he will take your fields and your vineyards and your olive yards and even the best of them and give them to his servants. And he will take the tenth of your seed of your vineyards and give to his officers and to his servants. And he will take your men servants and your maid servants and your goodliest young men and your asses and put them to his work. He will then take the tenth of your sheep, and ye shall be his servants, and ye shall cry out in that day because of your king, which ye shall have chosen, and you and the Lord will not hear you in that day. Okay, so there's more, semantics here. He says you're going to cry out, right? That we know that, that Benjamin, or that like Saul, right? That he's the tribe of Benjamin. This is like the ravening wolf, and he counts his plunder. But we also know that he cries, right? That he cries, and that he has tears, and that tear is somewhat, to tear something is to tear it into pieces, right? And he's gonna divide, right, in that way. But it's more so that, like, a ravening wolf is also like a rabbi, right? That when he says that, it means easily, raw, right, or raise, and then by, or like this is bias or force, or to work or to confine. That he's gonna that they need this priest, or this kind of rabbi, right, this ravening wolf, to kind of count people's plunder at night, right, to kind of figure it out, right? That we need people to kind of make sense and give reasoning to this whole mess of people, right? That we don't just rule over just this mess of people. That we need order, we need reasoning, and we need people to have a sense of reasoning for what they're doing. They need an occupation, right? They need something quite literally to occupy them. And then there's also Samuel, that he is, he's like the god of instruments, right? That he makes all these tools, quite literally. Hephaestus. God grants their request. Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, Nay, but we will have a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. And Samuel heard all the words of the people, and he rehearsed them in the ears of the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, Hearken unto their voice, and make them a king. And Samuel said unto the men of Israel, Go ye every man unto his city. So again, he tells them to go to their own place, or their own piece of land, or their own like house, right? Again, it's like Nestor or Hephaestus. In Book 1 of the Iliad, Achilles and Agamemnon get into a shouting match, and then Nestor has to break it up. I imagine this is analogous to the part in Samuel 1, as when the Ark of the Covenant, right? He's with the Philistines, or was, and then the Philistines' fealty is to the rock. Right, the Philistine literally means fealty to the rock, if you just look at it in Greek. And of course, Nestor is from Pylos, or literally a pile of rock. And so Nestor and Agamemnon are they're the Hippodomos, or hypocrites, right? They have this horsepower. They're the horse tamers. And again, there's a semantic argument here that hypocrite is somewhat misleading. It means that they're above the judges, or the judges are probably more likely the courts, or like these knights in shining armor. Whenever they talk about Samuel or even Agamemnon, those talk about like they have long hair, right? They haven't been cut. It hasn't. They're above the cutting. They're above this critique. They are hypocrites. Whereas the courts themselves are cut, right? They're below them. Now, Agamemnon getting control of them, it signifies they brought them under the like power of the capitalist. Agamemnon is the capital, and Achilles or the pharaoh is this aristocrat. He's just like this warrior class. So hypocrite is two-faced. So we can't it means kind of two things, right? We can't get caught up in the reading. It's just best to accept them as words and then kind of go from there, like dig deeper and just see what it means ultimately. And then well, that means that some of these, it could just be like Fight Club, right? It's like or it's like a play with one actor, right? Essentially, there's a bunch of personalities or something. That Nestor, Achilles, and Agamemnon is just a conversation with one person with many masks, or there's like a person with an angel or a devil on his shoulder or something. Because like Nestor again is similar to Hephaestus, but he's also like Athena, and that Athena was thrice born, or she's tritogenia, and Nestor, well, then when he comes out in the Iliad, he says that he rules over the third generation of her Pylos. And then we know Agamemnon, he's kind of like Athena, or he's like a Levite, that he's cursed to the third generation in effect. Right? By the end of the Iliad, or the Aristeia, the it's like this trilogy, right? We call it this Logos of three, if you want. So from Book 1 of the Iliad. From Book 1 of the Iliad. And Agamemnon answered, "Fly if you will. I shall make you no prayers to stay you. I have others who will do me honor, and above all, Jove, the Lord of counsel. There is no king here so hateful to me as you are, for you are ever quarrelsome and ill-affected. What though you be brave? Was it not heaven that made you so? Go home, then, with your ships and comrades, to lord it over the Myrmidons. I care neither for you nor your anger, and thus will I do. Since Phoebus Apollo is taking Chryseis from me, I shall send her with my ship and my followers. But I shall come to your tent, take your own prize, Briseis, that you may learn how much stronger I am than you are, and that another may fear to set himself up as equal or comparable with me." The son of Peleus was furious, and his heart within his shaggy breast was divided whether to draw his sword, push the others aside, and kill the son of Atreus, or to restrain himself and check his anger. While he was thus in two minds, and was drawing his mighty sword from its scabbard, Minerva came down from heaven, for Juno had sent her in the love she bore to them both, and seized the son of Peleus by his yellow hair, visible to him alone, for of the others no man could see her. Achilles turned in amaze, and by the fire that flashed from her eyes, at once knew that she was Minerva. "Why are you here?" said he, "daughter of Aegis bearing Jove, to see the pride of Agamemnon, son of Atreus? Let me tell you, and it shall surely be, he shall pay for this insolence with his life." And Minerva said, "I come from heaven, if you will hear me, to bid you stay your anger. Juno has sent me, who cares for both of you alike. Cease then this brawling, and do not draw your sword. Rail at him if you will, and your railing will not be vain, for I tell you, and it shall surely be, that you shall hereafter receive gifts 3 times as splendid by reason of this present insult. Hold therefore and obey." "Goddess," answered Achilles, "however angry a man may be, he must do as you two command him. This will be best, for the gods ever hear the prayers of him who has obeyed them." He stayed his hand on the silver hilt of his sword and thrust it back into the scabbard, as Minerva bade him. Then she went back to Olympus among the other gods, and to the house of Aegis-bearing Jove. But the son of Peleus again began railing at the son of Atreus, for he was still in a rage. "Wine bibber," he cried, "with the face of a dog and the heart of a hind, you never dare to go out with the host and fight, nor yet with our chosen men in ambuscade. You shun this as you do death itself. You had rather go round and rob his prizes from any man who contradicts you. You devour your people, for you are king over a feeble folk. Otherwise, son of Atreus, henceforward you would insult no man. Therefore I say, and swear it with a great oath, nay, by this my scepter, which shall sprout neither leaf nor shoot nor bud anew from the day on which it left its parent stem upon the mountains. For the axe stripped it of leaf and bark, and now the sons of the Achaeans bear it as judges and guardians of the decrees of heaven. So surely and solemnly do I swear that hereafter they shall look fondly for Achilles and shall not find him. In the day of your distress, when your men fall dying by the murderous hand of Hector, you shall not know how to help them, and you shall rend your heart with rage for the hour when you offered insult to the bravest of the Achaeans. With this, the son of Peleus dashed his gold-bestudded scepter on the ground and took his seat, while the son of Atreus was beginning fiercely from his place upon the other side. Then up rose smooth-tongued Nestor, the facile speaker of the Pylians, and the words fell from his lip, sweeter than honey. 2 generations of men born and bred in Pylos had passed away under his rule, and he was now reigning over the third. With all sincerity and goodwill, therefore, he addressed them thus. Of a truth, he said, a great sorrow has befallen the Achaean land. Surely Priam with his sons would rejoice, and the Trojans be glad at heart if they could hear this quarrel between you two who are so excellent in fight and counsel. I am older than either of you, therefore be guided by me. Moreover, I have been the familiar friend of men even greater than you are, and they did not disregard my counsels. Never again can I hold beside such men as Perithous and Dryas, shepherd of his people, or as Caeneus, Exadius, godlike Polyphemus, and Theseus, son of Aegeus, peer of the immortals. These were the mightiest men ever born upon this earth. Mightiest were they, and when they fought the fiercest tribe of mountain savages, they utterly overthrew them. I came from distant Pylos and went about amongst them, and for they would have me come, and I fought as it was in me to do. Not a man now living could withstand them, but they heard my words and were persuaded by them. So be it also with yourselves, for this is the more excellent way. Therefore, Agamemnon, though you are strong, take not this girl away, for the sons of the Achaeans have already given her to Achilles. And you, Achilles, strive not further with the king, for no man who, by the grace of Jove, wields a scepter has like honor with Agamemnon. You are strong and have a goddess for your mother, but Agamemnon is stronger than you, for he has more people under him. Son of Atreus, check your anger, I implore you. End this quarrel with Achilles, who in the day of battle is a tower of strength to the Achaeans. And Agamemnon answered, Sir, all that you have said is true, but this fellow must needs become our lord and master. He must be lord of all, king of all, and a captain of all. And this shall hardly be. Granted that the gods have made him a great warrior, have they also given him the right to speak without railing? Now, Book 1 and Book 2 of the Iliad are similar, in that Agamemnon, he goes to get Nestor first, right, in this time of crisis. And there in Book 2, they meet at Nestor's boat with the other elders, and they discuss the message from the dream. That Zeus, well, he's going to let the Greeks sack Troy, and they should assemble the troops and attack at once. And Agamemnon, he goes one further, right, and he schemes and he plans to lie to the Greek troops and tell them that the dream was, in fact, Zeus telling him to return home, right? So he negates the dream. The new shirt that Agamemnon puts on in the second book, right, in Greek it's called negatios. It's this negation. He is maybe like a trick up a sleeve, or again, that he's putting on the shining armor. He's like the Lord, and underneath are probably like the captains, like Odysseus, and underneath that you have all the laborers and cupbearers and such. And in addition, Apollo or Eli is supplanted from the previous book or chapters, respectively, in the Bible, right? So, or in the Iliad. It's a reflection of the transformation of values or the symbology. So there's a little truth to what Agamemnon says, right? That it was so originally in Book 2 of the Iliad, Agamemnon, he gets a lie from Zeus, right, in the form of Nestor. Then Agamemnon, he puts on his shirt. He negates it, meaning it's this kind of double negative, or it essentially is the truth, right? But nevertheless, it's Agamemnon, through the help of Odysseus and Nestor, he gets the troops back in line with this. Well, he tells the lie of the lie. So, and then so in reality, maybe they probably should have gone home, or you could say that the truth actually was somewhat true, right? It's just a matter of timing. That well, he wasn't going to sack it that day. Eventually, he did end up sacking it, right? So Zeus, or the lying dream, wasn't necessarily a lie. It's just a matter of timing. And then Odysseus serves as the captain of Agamemnon and Nestor's, and they're the Levitical priest, right? That we can understand that Simeon. Well, they're the second born, right? And then the Levites are the third born, right? So that if they're Tritogenia or Athena's Tritogenia, they're the third born, right? The Levites, Agamemnon and Nestor, and then Achilles, he's like Simeon, right? He's like the marshal, right? He's like this ultimate warrior guy, Achilles. He's similar to Apollo too, but he's he's also a lot like he's like Mars himself, right? He's the best warrior of them all. And then and it shows you what exactly kind of like this Athena does, right? She comes down and she tells this Mars guy to restrain himself. Then okay, so going back to the within the context of the Iliad, so nevertheless, it's Agamemnon, right, through the help of Odysseus, Nestor, and he gets the troops back in line, and with this lying dream. And then, so the Samuel, he's like Nestor, and then he's like the sign of God, and he appears in the dream, and then they have to rearrange the signs, and then they go out to meet the people, and the people are all kind of like in a mess, right? And they want a king essentially, because Achilles is left, so they're all like confused, and Agamemnon has to be the king, right? He still has to be the king, so he has to kind of pull the strings, right? He has to rearrange the signs so that people will understand it. What's going on, right? Not everyone understands, and then people can be misled. Oh no, sorry. So let's go back to the Iliad. My friend, said he, I've had a dream from heaven in the dead of night, and its face and figure resembled none but Nestor's. It hovered over my head and said, You're sleeping, son of Atreus, one who has the welfare of the host, and so much other care upon his shoulders should dock his sleep. Hear me at once, for I am a messenger from Jove, who, though he be not near, yet takes thought for you and pities you. He bids you get the Achaeans instantly under arms, for you shall take Troy. There are no longer divided councils among the gods. Juno has brought them over to her own mind, and woe betides the Trojans at the hands of Jove. Remember this, the dream then vanished, and I awoke. Let us now therefore arm the sons of the Achaeans, but it will be well that I should first sound them, and to this end I will tell them to fly with their ships, but do you others go about among the host and prevent their doing so. He then sat down, and Nestor, the prince of Pylos, with all sincerity and goodwill addressed them thus. My friends, said he, princes and counselors of the Argives, if any other men of the Achaeans had told us this dream, we should have declared it false, and would have nothing to do with it. But he who has seen it is the foremost man among us. We must therefore set about getting the people under arms. With this he led the way from the assembly, and the other scepter kings rose with him in obedience to the word of Agamemnon. But the people pressed forward to hear. They swarmed like bees that sally from some hollow cave and flit in countless throng among the spring flowers. Bunched in knots and clusters, even so did the mighty multitude pour from ships and tents to the assembly, and ranged themselves upon the wide-watered shore, while among them ran wildfire rumor, messenger of Jove, urging them ever to the fore. Thus they gathered, in a pell-mell of mad confusion, and the earth groaned under the tramp of men, as the people sought their places. 9 heralds went crying about among them to stay their tumult, and bid them listen to their king, till at least they were got to their several places and ceased their clamor. Then King Agamemnon rose, holding his scepter. This was the work of Vulcan, who gave it to Jove, the son of Saturn. Jove gave it to Mercury, slayer of Argus, guide and guardian. King Mercury gave it to Pelops, the mighty charioteer, and Pelops to Atreus, the shepherd of his people. Atreus, when he died, left it to Thyestes, rich in flocks, and Thyestes, in his turn, left it to be borne by Agamemnon, that he might be lord of all Argos and of all the isles. Leaning then on his scepter, he addressed the Argives. Odysseus is the captain of King Agamemnon. And then in Book 2 of the Iliad, he goes and he divides the people into the 2 groups. There's like the aristocrats and the kings, and then there's like the ordinary roughnecks and stuff that are all fighting amongst each other. And then from there, he gives them talking to convince each group to stay with the campaign, each, according to their class, they get different talking. So once their fealty or loyalty is with Agamemnon, they're further divided within there, which is kind of covered in the end of Book 2 of the Iliad, in the catalog of ships, right? That they talk about, where they're from, right? That every place has class, but each place is different ethnically, right? That geographically people are usually separated, and then we call those places ethnos, or groups of people, right? That these men are divided into by their ships or where they've come from, right? And then we talked about 50 men came from here, 100 men came from here, right at the end of Book 2 of the Iliad. And then moving on, Nestor, like Samuel, is the messenger, a message of God, or the sign of God. So again, it's like a wordplay where the Lord and Samuel have to talk it over, right? Once after the people reject the voice of Samuel, because the people want a king, but then they reject him, and then he has to come back right after he talks with the Lord. And then they said that people still worshipped other gods. So eventually, though, Saul, the Benjamite, is chosen for the king of the Israelites in chapter 9 of book 1 of the book of Samuel in the Bible. And then in the Greek myths, in book 2 of the Iliad, so again, Odysseus, he slaps around Thersites, right? He puts a big welt on his back, and then he separates the two fringes, right? It's average, and then the aristocrats and normies. There's some that are left to rot. That there's this like hysteria, and then the people are left behind. There's this hysteresis, which is like a physical term to describe a lag. And it can be thought of as like a tide. Maybe that the shellfish or something are left to rot in a sense, right? In this physical sense, as the tide goes back out. And then, but there's probably more to it than that, right? There's probably like, well, you have these kind of bigger waves, or these kings and such that, well, they're probably fewer than the normies, right? They're far fewer, but they probably have a higher amplitude or something, right? That they have a longer wavelength or something. And then the other ones are like a little more energetic. They're all brawling around, and so if you could imagine, it's like a chaotic mess. It's like this, right? It would be like this high frequency waves, but they have low amplitude. Or they could have high amplitude. It would just be a general mess. It would be high frequency, right? It would be one wave after the other, and they would be all over the place. Now, Saul. Okay, so Saul is chosen as king. Oh, sorry, shit. And then there's kind of more to it too, right? That when Chryseus, he comes, he brings the good tides, or that he comes. There's 9 days of plague, and then on the 10th day it's a peace, and that's like a teeth, right? It's like a 10th, or you could say that's like a good tiding or something, right? Or it's related to the tide. And again, this kind of 9 and 10. Well, they're interlinked between the moon and the sun, also between birth and stuff, and the sun. But again, the sun is a homophone. And then, okay, so moving on to the Bible. Now, Saul chosen as king. Now, there was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, the son of Zeror, the son of Becharath, the son of Apial, and a Benjamite, a mighty man of power. And he had a son whose name was Saul, a choice young man and a goodly one. And there was not among the children of Israel a goodlier person than he. From his shoulders and upward he was higher than any of the people. And the asses of Kish, Saul's father, were lost. And Kish said to his son, Take now one of the servants with thee, and arise, go seek the asses. And he passed through Mount Ephraim, and passed through the land of Shalisha, I don't know how you say that, but they found them not. Then they passed through the land of Shalim, and there they were not. And he passed through the land of the Benjamites, but they found them not. And when they were come to the land of Zuph, Saul said to his servants that was with him, Come and let us return, lest my father leave caring for the asses, and take thought for us. And he said unto him, Behold, now there is in this city a man of God, and he is an honorable man. All that he saith cometh surely to pass. Now let us go thither. Peradventure he can show us on our way that we should go. Then said Saul to his servant, But behold, if we go, what shall we bring the man? For the bread is spent in our vessels, and there is not a present to bring to the man of God. What have we? And the servant answered Saul again and said, Behold, I have here at hand the fourth part of a shekel of silver, that will I give to the man of God to tell us our way. Before time in Israel, when a man went to inquire of God, thus he spake, Come and let us go to the seer, for that is now called a prophet, was before time called a seer. Then said Saul to his servant, Well said, Come, let us go. So they went on to the city where the man of God was. And as they went up the hill to the city, they found young maidens going out to draw water, and said unto them, Is the seer here? And they answered them and said, He is, behold, he is before you. Make haste now, for he came to the city, for there is a sacrifice of the people to the day in the high place. As soon as ye came into the city, ye shall straightway find him, before he go up to the high place to eat. For the people will not eat until he come, because he doth bless the sacrifice, and afterwards they eat that be bidden. Now therefore get you up, for about this time ye shall find him. And they went up into the city, and when they were come into the city, behold, Saul came out against them to go up to the high place. Right, so Saul welcomes them in. He gives them the good, Samuel welcomes them, right? That Saul's coming, he's welcoming, right? That by Samuel, so it's just like this good tidings or good comings again. And then Saul, of course, is the name of apostle of Jesus, who spread Christianity around the Mediterranean world. And of course he changed his name from Saul to Paul, where Paul is, well, everyone knows Paul. Paul in French is Paul, I think. In English it's Paul. Maybe in German it's Paul. In Spanish it's Pablo. And then Greek, Pavros. And then the root itself, Paul, P-A-U, means small. And then Saul is described in Samuel as being physically tall, or you imagine, right? He says the sun is above your shoulders, right? It's like he says that he was high above in the sky, right? That it was like shoulders above everyone. And then so to go from Saul to Paul would mean that you would go from tall to short, right? Or something like that. The sun would go backwards, right? That you see how Christianity is like kind of like this mirroring of the Greek myths and such, that it's like what's good has become bad, and what's bad has become good, and what's small has become big, and what's strong has become weak, right? That you go from big to small, to rich to poor. But in this, that Saul has kind of done the opposite. There's a little bit of both, right? That Benjamin, he says, is the smallest tribe, but Saul himself is the tallest of the Israelites. So essentially, there is no nobility in poverty. There's no nobility in poverty, but greatness, right? It resides in a few. There's also the good comings, or the differences, I think, in orthodox and paradox, or maybe that the hysteresis, right? There isn't this 100% retracement in some of these natural phenomena. There's a lot of times with waves, you're only just seeing things. What you see is like you're not seeing like the small scales, right? That we see stuff on such a large scale, doesn't really matter. That the like the building blocks are so small that we're only seeing kind of this like one strata, or one quantification, or one quanta, right? That Newtonian physics just holds up. But when we have things like liquids, that you start to have these kind of like impurities within them, and then liquids in themselves are amorphous beings, that they're somewhat, their molecules start to move around more freely than a solid or something, right? But it's not quite like air, that they're so displaced that they don't interact with each other. That a water molecule, that they do interact, and they can move around and such, but they can't move around that much, right? That you can't really compress a liquid or anything. You can compress a liquid somewhat, but not quite that much, right? That the molecules are interacting with each other. That is somewhat like a solid, right? It's just amorphous. It's not amorphous, it's its own state, but you can see how sometimes it's like that in a water you can begin to see both kind of phenomenon, right? That it's like somewhat of like a wave like, but also that it also does behave somewhat like a particle, right? That is somewhat like a solid. And then there's also the saying that, right, that went to that when we make assumptions, right, that we make an ass out of you and me, and that in theory, we everything looks good, right? But in reality, we make assumptions, and sometimes the assumptions are good enough, right? Like you could just say that, Newton had made good assumptions, right? And in reality, he didn't understand the whole scope because we're dealing with like the large scale, right? That the mathematics of the small scale didn't really even matter because we're not observing it. It's so small. Like quantum mechanics or something like that, right? That we're not talking about. How would he have known any of that, anyways? And Agamemnon, he needs Nestor, or Nestor is necessary, right, for his lie. That necessity is the root of all invention, right? That again, that Dan and Naphtali, they're born from this by law, right? She's calamity. Her name means calamity or trouble. So out of this kind of calamity, we're going to get this invention. And it's like, remember, Rachel, it's out of necessity that she wants children or something. But in reality, she can't produce it by blood. It's this kind of tool or something. It's this out of necessity. It's an invention. She has to buy law. She has to find kind of like this circumventing, right? And then there's again this more physical sense to it that you need a god to predict the waves of the ocean or the tides, quite physically in reality, right? That when the rain comes and goes and the time for leaving port and shipping and stuff, you need to know that in order to profit. And the sun only shines for half the day, right? So you also need to include the nighttime, the lunar calendar. In addition, the sun can be used to signal things religiously, right? We all know this, and you can profit from it. With silver, right? It's implied in the Bible in Samuel 1, chapter 9, that he profits from it, it's said. And then also the sun, right? It goes up in the midday sky, and I think we all know that. It's like we all eat lunch at noon, roughly. And then in Islam, they do these calls to prayers. But I think there's more to it in that, well, to be unprofitable is like ra, right? Ara is to profit, but ra is like easy, right? But ra also means to raise, right? So like to raise a question, right? So then they say like that he has kind of like raised this question, did he not? It's kind of a weird double negative if you understand it, because like to say raw, right? Did you say unraise something or something that you ask a question about a question, right? They said, right? That's it. I think that's what it says in the Bible. It's kind of funny. So let's read. Now the Lord had told Samuel in his ear a day before Saul came, saying, Tomorrow about this time I will send a man out of the land of Benjamin, and thou shalt anoint him to be captain over my people Israel, that he may serve my people out of the land of the Philistines. For I have looked upon my people, because their cry is come unto me. And when Samuel saw Saul, the Lord said unto him, Behold, the man whom I spake to thee of, this same shall reign over my people. Then Saul drew near to Samuel in the gate, and said, Tell me, I pray thee, where the seer's house is. And that Samuel answered Saul, and said, I am the seer. Go up before me unto the high place, for you shall eat with me today, and tomorrow I will let thee go, and will tell thee all that is in thine heart, and for thine asses that were lost 3 days ago, set not thy mind on them, for they are found, and on whom is all that desire of Israel. Is it not on thee and on all thy father's house? And Saul answered and said, Am I not a Benjamite of the smallest of the tribes of Israel, and my family the least of all the families of the tribe of Benjamin? Wherefore then speakest thou so to me? And Samuel took Saul and his servant, and brought them into the parlor, and made them sit in the chiefest place among them that were bidden, which were about 30 persons. And Saul said unto the cook, Bring the portion which I gave thee of which I said unto thee, set it by thee. And the cook took up the shoulder, and that which was upon it, and set it before Saul. And Samuel said, Behold, that which is left, set it before thee, and eat, for unto this time hath it been kept for thee, since I said, I have invited the people. So Saul did eat with Samuel that day, and they were come down from the high place into the city. Samuel communed with Saul upon the top of the house, and they rose early. And it came to pass about the spring of the day that Samuel called Saul to the top of the house, saying, Up, that I may send thee away. And Saul rose, and they went both of them, and he and Samuel abroad, and they were going down to the end of the city. Samuel said to Saul, Bid the servant pass on before us. And he passed on, but stand thou still a while, that I may show thee the word of God. So this is a lot like the story of Atreus, and he feeds Thyestes his children, right? And the shoulder is homos, or man. To eat the shoulder is to eat man. and it's Menelaus, right? In Agamemnon, it's kind of that same dynamic. That Menelaus is probably he's like Thyestes, right? And we're or like Saul, while Agamemnon is like the Lord, and he's kind of like he has like Samuel, that he has these signs or this language, this semantics, right? That he's gonna confuse people, and this is like Atreus as well. That there's these three cities, right? There's a third, and then you're fleeing from it. And then in Samuel 1, Saul, well, he's looking for his asses, and in Greek there's the word iskeros, or you can imagine if you took away the a, it's like iskeros. So askeros is causing shame, uh, causing shame or dishonor, reproachful. So I'm assuming where we get like ass from, and that to not cause shame is like Iskaros or something. It's like Issachar, and he's like one of the 12 sons of Jacob. Remember that Issachar, he's the raw-shouldered donkey who submits to the burden, right? And he's going to go along the way, right? He's going to become the seasoned veteran, which again is like a wordplay with the shoulder, also being a man or homos, and an ass is like a donkey. And then they're looking for the asses. They're looking for a shaman, essentially. They're a man of God. They didn't find anyone, so like no one had any shame. There was no man of God to be found, right, until the end. And then they profit from the fact at the end. The Greek word for profit, or one of them, is like proktos. For profitable is proktos, to put into practice, right? To put the theory into practice. This could be some assumptions, and assumptions, well, they might not matter. Some assumptions might matter. It just might not. It's just completely negligible. Some of the concerns, right? You shouldn't worry about some of this crap that you don't put things into practice. It's like a 1 in a billion that something might come up. But in reality is, you do need a theory, and you need to have, well, you have to have like all your P's and Q's and dot of your I's and all that. But at the end of the day, you have to make some assumptions. So, but the reverse of that is that you can make an ass, right, out of you and me. Again, Saul is taller than the rest of the Israelites. They are only up to his shoulders, and Paul is small or poor, whereas Saul is a Benjamite. He's he's large, but it's juxtaposed within the Benjamite that he's the smallest of the tribes. Probably some other kind of wordplay, right, where pi or pi is the normal p in the English language, like in pizza, but also there's psi, like in psychology. And then in Greek, there's Ptolemy, right, where the P is not necessarily pronounced, right, how we know in English. Or like where Ptolemy is, it literally means war, right, in Greek. Or Salome, well, I think Salome is somewhat like war. It could also mean like praise or a psalm. And right, it's probably also how we know Salem or Jerusalem, right, from the Christianity. And then in Spanish, well, just personally, I know this. It's like a popular name, Salome. And then you could say Solomon, maybe is related to that as well. In Hebrew, Saul means to call or ask for. So, like call and Saul are literally the same. I think it's just how you pronunciate Saul. You could get call from it. But they weren't, right? So they were asking for it. They were asking they were asking for it, and they got shamed. They found God. You're kind of, sometimes when you look for trouble, you find it. That Shamash or Apollo or Helios essentially was God, right? And he's replaced by this semantics, and that it's best to kind of lead, right, your opposition. You have to lead your opposition. And that opposition means like vision or seeing, right? So we can again equate the tribe of Benjamin with the cult of Apollo. There's also the curse of Atreus, where Thyestes, he's given the golden lamb to sacrifice to Artemis, but he didn't. He placed it in a box. And then there was a decree that the son of Pelops would become king, and the one who produced the lamb would be the king, and Thyestes, of course, produced the lamb. But because he didn't sacrifice to Artemis, the golden kid or lamb, he's cursed, which is kind of like Isaac, that he didn't sacrifice, right? Abraham didn't sacrifice Isaac. He ended up sacrificing this lamb in addition. Artemis can mean like an artisan or a seasoned veteran. That perhaps it's about like pensions or guilds. That there's like political and military interpretations in these myths as well, right? That these people lived in a society. They didn't just like live out in the middle of nowhere, like like everyone. Like there wouldn't. That's what was chaos. Now the myths are about civilization and how people became Aryans and civilized. Perhaps the easiest life is often unprofitable, but great art is worth its weight in gold, right? That art itself, it should be for the race, or the kingdom can't be until you have great art, or that you're using this great art, that you're not going to have this great kingdom. Furthermore, veteran and veterinarian share similarities. There's also the word Hippodomia that shows up in the Iliad and Apollodorus' Bibliotheca. Essentially what I'd gather is that a veterinarian would be, I'd imagine, what you would think of as like a Hippodomia, this horse tamer, or horse doctor, or like even like these charioteers, right? You would have to know how to care for your horses. They would probably be as cared for as like a human. You have to ask, what is a horse doctor? Well, somebody they would have to know how to tame a horse or be around horses. And that, like, the veterinarian implies that you're kind of like this charioteer. You're a veteran in the military. In Genesis, it's understood that Abraham, not sacrificing his son and instead the lamb, signifies that Abraham will go ahead and become a veteran. He will build stables. He's going to breed and raise livestock and just represent this general progression of technology in civilization in general. He's going to build. Moving on to Samuel 1, chapter 10. Samuel anoints Saul. Then Samuel took a vial of oil and poured it upon his head and kissed him. And it said, Is it not because the Lord hath anointed thee to be captain over his inheritance? When thou art departed from me today, then thou shalt find 2 men by Rachel's sepulchre in the border of Benjamin at Zelzah, and they will say unto thee, The asses which thou wentest to seek are found, and lo, thy father hath left the care of the asses, and sorroweth for you, saying, What shall I do for my son? And thou shalt go on forward from thence, and thou shalt come to the plain of Tabor, and there shall meet thee 3 men going up to God to Bethel, one carrying 3 kids, and another carrying 3 loaves of bread, and another carrying a bottle of wine. And they will salute thee, and give thee 2 loaves of bread, in which thou shalt receive of their hands, after thou shalt come to the hill of God, where is the garrison of the Philistines, and it shall come to pass, when thou art come thither to the city, that thou shalt meet a company of prophets coming down from the high place, with a psaltery, and a tabret, and a pipe, and a harp before them, and they shall prophesy. And the Spirit of the Lord will come upon thee, and thou shalt prophesy with him, and thou shalt be turned into another man. And let it be, when these signs come on to thee, that thou do as occasion serve thee, for God is with thee, and thou shalt go down before me to Gilgal, and behold, I will come thou unto thee to offer burnt offerings, and to sacrifice sacrifices of peace offerings. 7 days shalt thou tarry, till I come to thee and show thee what thou shalt do. From Genesis, Rachel, the wife of Jacob, gives birth to Benjamin and Joseph, where Joseph I interpret as the cult of Hermes. So, like the Homeric hymn to Hermes, that Apollo, right, he looks for his stolen cattle that Hermes has taken, and it's Hermes' mother, Maya, that makes him go and take the cattle in the first place. Or it's like his mother, Maya, kicks Hermes out of the cave they live in, and he has to take the high road, essentially. And Samuel, in the book of Samuel, anoints Saul as the leader, and then he kisses him and he anoints him, where anointing is in Greek is aleph, right? So it's translating this way. The Greek myths, Agamemnon is the firstborn, right? He's the firstborn, and then Menelaus is the secondborn. And it's through the blaming of Paris for stealing Helen from Menelaus that he's able to keep this war alive, right? That he needs this shame of Menelaus, or this narrative, he needs to stop it from being corrupted. He needs this fake opposition, right? He needs to keep this from being again corrupted, right? That we understand anointing is putting oil over something, is this religious process, but it's really to keep the rock or these things that they worship from corroding or oxidizing. And it's the narrative or shame of Menelaus or shame of Saul, this kind of fake opposition. Samuel is a sign of God, and he tells Saul the signs that were to pass, and he talks about him being the captain, and he's going to be changed into this new man, right? And that new man could be Odysseus, right? That again, that Paul or Saul goes to Paul, and it's like Odysseus and Menelaus. Well, it's all wordplay between these two, really. That even in the Odyssey, there is Menelaus and Odysseus being juxtaposed, right? The mercurial versus the Apollonian. That in the Iliad, Athena turns into a herald or the form of one and bids everyone listen. And if we just understand that Odysseus is kind of the captain or the Pied Piper, it makes sense. We don't need to kind of like what we need to do really is let go of the preconceived notions of Odysseus as someone else, right? And just kind of let the words tell us what it is. And in Book 2 of the Iliad, Odysseus talks about the prophecy or vision that Calchas gave Agamemnon when he sacrificed his daughter Iphigenia on the island of Aulis in order for Jove to allow him safe passage to Troy in the first place. And then Aulis itself means like a flute or something, or a pipe, right? This kind of pipe or flute. And then the three signs with the birds and the snake. Well, this is just like the Book of Samuel again with the prophecy of these three people and the pipe and stuff and the lyre, right? Because again, Apollo is associated with lyres, and then Odysseus is kind of again this Pied Piper, right? We understand that this aulos, and then of course that Apollo is the Benjaminite. That or if we want to find an analogous kind of tribe within the Hebrew mythology, it's the Benjaminites. And then, like I said, they're related to and through Samuel through this tomb of Rachel, where Rachel is the mother of Joseph and Benjamin, and we can say that Apollo and Mercury are related as well, right, in the Greek myths, and we understand that through this juxtaposing of Menelaus and Odysseus. Okay, that. Odysseus is like Mercury; he's like the spirit, whereas Menelaus is kind of this kind of remaining or Apollonian figure, right? He's like this the lyre, the music, the art. So back to the curse of Atreus. Thyestes tricked Atreus by having Arope steal the golden lamb. And when he proved proof of it, he became king of Mycenae. So Zeus sent Hermes to Atreus and told him to stipulate with Thyestes that Atreus should be king if the sun should go backward. And when Thyestes agreed, the sun set in the east. Hence the deity having plainly attested to usurping of Thyestes, Atreus got the kingdom and banned Thyestes. Saul will become Paul, essentially, that there is no nobility in poverty and that greatness lies in the few or the small. There can be more to this in general with the semantics that reason or raise, right? Reason or raise is to pose a question, that you raise a question. Ra or rhesus or razon are all kind of the same. They all mean race or raise or raise, right, from the sun. These are all the same words, and they all relate to this solar deity, Ra, I'm assuming, from ancient Egypt. And it's associated with light and truth. And also priest. And it's become transformed into this shamanry, right? It's become kind of a sham, it seems. Ra also means ease, as in art, right? You can use this ease to paint on. And ara, the negation of Ra, is this unease, or to be profitable, right? That art, we understand, we associate with starving artist, and that you could say that Saul has sold out the post or at the juct, right, or the shoulder. And again, that Odysseus, the captain, he's this juxtapose of Menelaus. There is empathy and sympathy, and also these kind of frequency and wavelength arguments here too. But I just kind of want to focus on the simple semantics, because like these are confusing enough. I don't want to throw out all these things, but I think you would understand that there's a lot kind of going on, not just kind of this word games. But that's just the beginning. I think once you kind of understand that, you could move on to other things. You don't have to worry about what's what. Samuel's signs fulfilled. And it was so that when he had turned his back to go from Samuel, God gave him another heart, and all those signs came to pass that day. And when they came thither to the hill, behold, a company of prophets met him, and the Spirit of God came upon him. And he prophesied among them, and it came to pass, when all that him before time saw, that, behold, he prophesied among the prophets. Then the people said to one to another, What is this that has come unto the son of Kish? Is Saul also among the prophets? And one of the same place answered and said, But who is their father? Therefore it became a proverb. Is Saul among the prophets? And when he had made an end of prophesying, he came to the high place. And Saul's uncle said unto him and to his servant, Whither went ye? And he said, To seek the asses. And when we saw that they were nowhere, we came to Samuel. And Saul's uncle said, Tell me, I pray thee, what Samuel said unto you. And Saul said unto his uncle, He told us plainly that the asses were found, but of the matter of the kingdom whereof Samuel spake, he told them not. Saul proclaimed king. And Samuel called the people together unto the Lord to Mizpah, and said unto the children of Israel, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, I brought up Israel out of Egypt, and delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, out of the hand of all kingdoms, and of them that oppressed you. And ye have this day rejected your God, who himself saved you out of all your adversities and your tribulations. And ye have said unto him, Nay, but set a king over us. Now therefore present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and by your thousands. And when Samuel had caused all the tribes of Israel to come near, the tribe of Benjamin was taken. When he had caused the tribe of Benjamin to come near by their families, the family of Matri was taken, and Saul the son of Kish was taken. And when they had sought him, he could not be found. Therefore they inquired of the Lord further, if the man should yet come thither. And the Lord answered, Behold, he hath hid himself among the stuff. And they ran and fetched him thence, and when he stood among the people, he was higher than any of the people from his shoulders and upward. And Samuel said to all the people, See ye him whom the Lord hath chosen, that there is none like him among all the people. And all the people shouted and said, God save the king. Then Samuel told the people the manner of the kingdom, and wrote it in a book, and laid it up before the Lord. And Samuel sent all the people away, every man to his house. And Saul also came home to Gibeah, and there went with him a band of men whose hearts God had touched. But the children of Belial said, How shall this man save us? And they despised him, and brought him no presents, but he held his peace. So again, that there's this juxtapose, right? That the spirit is like this mercurial, right? This Joseph or something, that Hermes or Mercury steals the cattle of Apollo, and then Apollo has to kind of look for him and find him. And then through this, there's this switching of values, right? That Hermes, he gets the caducean, and then Apollo, in turn, gets this lyre. And then Odysseus, he's known as this Pied Piper, right? He's the juxtaposed to Menelaus. He is related to Hermes, where Menelaus is related to Apollo, or they represent these kind of juxtaposed tribes. In the Iliad, the analogy is when Menelaus comes last to the sacrifice. Switching over, in Book 2 of the Iliad, it's Nestor who comes out after Odysseus, and he speaks and he shames everyone. Quite literally, he asks them, where is their shame? And this is like in Samuel 8 or chapter 8 or chapter 9 of Samuel 1. It's Saul who was looking for the asses, and they found the ass, and he has become shamed. In the Iliad, the analogy would be that when Menelaus, he comes last to the sacrifice in Book 2, and it says it isn't on his own accord, or at least in the translation, that Menelaus, right, he's this shame they need, that they are fighting essentially for him, or because of this perceived shame of his, and that he can't help him. He might not want the shame, but he is kind of all he wants to get rid of at the same time. He's stuck between this rock and a hard place. That it seems that that he understands that it's not about him, it's about his brother, but at the same time, he feels like it's all about him, right? Agamemnon, king of men, sacrificed a fat 5-year-old bull to the mighty son of Saturn and invited the prince and elders of his host. First he asked Nestor and King Idomeneus, then the 2 Ajaxes and the son of Tydeus, and sixthly Ulysses, peer of gods and councils. But Menelaus came of his own accord, for he knew how busy his brother was. They stood around the bull with the barley meal in their hands, and Agamemnon prayed, saying, Jove, most glorious, supreme, that dwellest in heaven and ridest upon the storm cloud, grant that the sun may not go down, nor the night fall, till the palace of Priam is laid low, and its gates are consumed with fire. Grant that my sword may pierce the shirt of Hector about his heart, and that full many of his comrades may bite the dust as they fall dying round him. Thus he prayed, but the son of Saturn would not fulfill his prayer. He accepted the sacrifice, yet none the less increased their toil continually. Yeah, so he says something about the sun going down, but obviously it doesn't happen, right? That the sun not go down, but the sun obviously does go down, and he doesn't sack Troy, right? That Saturn, it's kind of negated his prayer. And then continuing on, Samuel 11 is kind of, it's more of the same, right? The curse of Atreus, where Saul, he hacks up the yoke, and then he sends it to all the corners of Israel to summon the troops. And it's like this. If you're looking for an analogy, like in the Iliad, it's in Book 2. There's a part about the Carrion Sea, that the winds, they buffet in every direction the water. And again, Menelaus, he doesn't come on his own accord, and then they sacrifice the oxen, and then afterwards Nestor and Odysseus speak, and then there's like 7 or 6 of them are mentioned, and then so they split up the sacrifice. And then remember, it's Menelaus or Saul who is the shame or shaman they fight for, whether in the Iliad or in Samuel 1 respectively. They fight because they fight in the Iliad because Helen has been stolen from Menelaus, or that's what Agamemnon wants everyone to think, right? And Helen is Helios. Helen is like the sun almost, right? It's like their torch, their symbol of the god, or their own livelihood, their own likeness. And that Saul, when he sends out the hacked up yoke, it's like almost like right, so they fight for Helen, or that's what Agamemnon wants everyone to think, or that when Saul, he sends out this hacked up yoke, it's kind of the same thing, right? That the ocean itself is kind of buffeted in all these directions, and all these people are going everywhere, right? It's like a giant mess, and then they all come into this filing, all come into this neat order after Athena comes down, right? And it'd also be that somewhat that Saul can't hack it, right? Neither can Menelaus. Like Saul and Menelaus, they're not bad people, and that's probably the doom of them, right? That they've kind of been thrust in this position where it's not for bad people, right? You have to be able to hack it. and then there's also more, right, that you want to bury the hatchet, right? They want to make peace, but there's also this past history in the line of Atreus, the pieces of the children that were eaten, they were hacked up. And then the 3 and 2 is most likely like this reference, right, again, to Hera and Athena, where Athena is thrice born. She's also the god of fog, this mist, and she's also the one who leads from the front. She's the promacho, the one from the front of the battle, and then she's the driver of the spoil. Athena, she's essentially a strategy and war goddess, right, from all her epithets, that you could understand how god of fog or something would be associated with war. And then Hera is the goddess of marriage and couples, so she's like the ordered pair of 2s, and then she's the era mystique. But I think when we talk about 3s and 2s, we talk about Athena and then Hera. And then reading more from Samuel 1, Saul defeats the Ammonites. Then Nahash, the Ammonite, came up and encamped against Jabesh Gilead, and all the men of Jabesh said unto Nahash, Make a covenant with us, and we will serve thee. And Nahash the Ammonite answered them, On this condition will I make a covenant with you, that I may thrust out all your right eyes, and lay it for a reproach upon Israel. And the elders of Jabesh said unto him, Give us 7 days respite, that we may send messengers unto all the coasts
of Israel. And then, if there be no man to save us, we will come out to thee. Then came the messengers to Gibeah of Saul, and told the tidings in the ears of the people, and all the people lifted up their voices and wept. And behold, Saul came after the herd out of the field, and Saul said, What aileth the people that they weep? And they told him the tidings of the men of Jabesh. And the Spirit of God came upon Saul when he heard the tidings, and his anger was kindled greatly. And he took a yoke of oxen, and hewed them in pieces, and sent them throughout all the coast of Israel by the hands of messengers, saying, Whoever cometh not forth after Saul and after Samuel, so shall it be done unto his oxen. And the fear of the Lord fell on the people, and they came out with one consent. And when he numbered them in Bezek, the children of Israel were 300,000, and the men of Judah 30,000. They said unto the messengers that came, Thus shall ye say unto the men of Jabesh Gilead, Tomorrow by that time the sun be hot, ye shall have help. And the messengers came and showed it to the men of Jabesh, and they were glad. Therefore the men of Jabesh said, Tomorrow we will come out unto you, and you shall do with us all that seemeth good unto you. And it was so on the morrow that Saul put the people in 3 companies, and they came into the midst of the host in the morning watch, and slew the Ammonites until the heat of day. And it came to pass that which remained were scattered, so that 2 of them were not left together. Saul confirmed as king. And the people said unto Samuel, Who is that he said, Shall Saul reign over us? But bring the men, that we may put them to death. And Saul said, There shall not a man be put to death this day, for today the Lord hath wrought salvation in Israel. Then said Samuel to the people, Come, and let us go to Gilgal, and renew the kingdom there. And all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. And there they sacrificed sacrifices of peace offerings before the Lord. And there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. Going back to the second book of the Iliad, after Odysseus and Nestor speak, the Greek troops have a sacrifice, and then Minerva gets the troops into action with the Aegis. Because remember, they're like kind of disordered. Like Odysseus has got them into 2 camps, but they need to get into like their formation as far as like militarily, which of course leads to the famous catalog of ships at the end of book 2 of the Iliad. And the first book of Samuel in chapter 14, with Jonathan, there's the talk of this pomegranate tree, and then they rolled the stone. And equating this to the Greek myths in the Iliad, it's like there's a character in the catalog of ships. His name is Ascophalos. And Ascophalos is a person who was changed into an owl, or Ascophalos quite literally means an owl, or it means like a scholar. Because they witness, well, the myth for Ascophalos is he witnessed Persephone eating the pomegranate, right? And then in Samuel 1, chapter 14, of course, right, it's Jonathan. He eats this honey, and then he was doomed to die. But then there's this compromise where he doesn't die, but he has a little bit of shame. Jonathan I see as Aeneas, and again, the end of the book of the Iliad, or the second book, is the catalog of ships, and this is like, well, it's like books 13 and 14, and maybe even some of 15 of the first book of Saul, because I say, well, the first 2 books of the Iliad are roughly like the first 15 books of Samuel. And I'm not going to get into the catalog of ships because that's like something entirely on its own, right? As much as it's relevant to this, it's relevant to like the whole book. So it's almost like its own animal. I don't want to turn this into something like of a mess. But relevant to this, in the end of book 2 of the Iliad, Athena gets the Greeks going. So it's like Jonathan, right? Let's read from the Iliad. Thus he prayed, but the son of Saturn would not fulfill his prayer. He accepted the sacrifice, yet nonetheless increased their toil continually. When they had been done praying and sprinkling the barley meal upon the victim, they drew back his head, killed it, and then flayed it. They cut out the thigh bones, wrapped them round in 2 layers of fat, and set pieces of raw meat on top of them. These they burned upon the split logs of firewood, but they spitted the inward meats and held them in the flames to cook. When the thigh bones were burned and they had tasted the inward meats, they cut the rest up small,
put the pieces upon the spits, roasted them till they were done, and drew them off. Then, when they had finished their work and the feast was ready, they ate it, and every man had his full share, so that they were all satisfied. As soon as they had enough to eat and drink, Nestor, knight of Gerene, began to speak. King Agamemnon, said he, let us not stay here talking, nor be slack in the work that heaven has put into our hands. Let the heralds summon the people to gather at their several ships. We will then go about among the hosts, that we may begin fighting at once. Thus did he speak, and Agamemnon heeded his words. He at once sent the criers round to call the people into assembly. So they called them, and the people gathered thereon. The chiefs about the son of Atreus chose their men and marshaled them, while Minerva went among them, holding her priceless aegis, that knows neither age nor death. From it there waved 100 tassels of pure gold, all deftly woven, and each one of them worth 100 oxen. With this she darted furiously everywhere among the hosts of the Achaeans, urging them forward and putting courage into the heart of each, so that he might fight and do battle without ceasing. Thus war became sweeter in their eyes, even then returning home in their ships, as when some great forest fire is raging upon a mountain top, and its light is seen from afar. Even so, as they marched, the gleam of their armor flashed up into the firmament. So again, that Athena makes the war sweeter for the Greeks in their eyes. It's like Jonathan has become enlightened himself by eating the honey. He makes the war sweeter for the Israelites as they go out and they beat the Philistines, right, in Samuel. And then Athena, she has also another epithet. She's also the hand of God, it's called in Greek. And of course, there's the same language in Samuel 1, chapter 14, where Jonathan goes out with his armor bearer into Philistine territory, and then he says if the hand of God takes them onto the Philistine, then it's God's will, essentially. So this is where I kind of tie it in with Jonathan, right? That if you read the catalog of ships at the end, like Aeneas is one of the first of the Trojans to be talked about, right? That there's these people at the watchtower, and they see the Greeks coming, right? They see this like enlightened people, this people, and then it's Aeneas, right? That is kind of the first one, or at least that's why I think he's like Aeneas. Maybe other people could argue that Jonathan is something else. Ultimately, so like again, like ultimately, if you read through Book 2 of the Iliad, right? Because if you make it to the end of ultimately to the end of Book 2 of the Iliad, it's a catalog of ships, and the first people that talked about the Dardanians are Aeneas, and then they talk about who do they talk about? Sarpedon and Glaucus, right? So Aeneas is the son of Anchises, who's the son of Venus. Or Aeneas is the son of Anchises and Venus. Sorry. So let's read from the end of Book 2 of the Iliad. Priam's son, great Hector of the gleaming helmet, commanded the Trojans, and with him were arrayed by far the greater number and most valiant of those who were longing for the fray. The Dardanians were led by the brave Aeneas, whom Venus bore to Anchises. When she, goddess though she was, had lain with him upon the mountain slopes of Ida, he was not alone, for with him were two sons of Antenor, Archilochus and Acamas, but both skilled in all the arts of war. That they dwelt in Teleia under the low spurs of Mount Ida, men of substance who drink the limpid waters of Hephaestus and are of Trojan blood. These were led by Pandarus, son of Lycon, whom Apollo had taught to use the bow. And of course, the last to be mentioned are Glaucus and Sarpedon, Sarpedon and Glaucus led the Lycaeans from their distant land, by the eddying waters of the Xanthos. Sarpedon is like the flesh. He literally means flesh like foot, but he could also mean sarcasm, or sarcasm is like grinding of teeth, or in reality he's like opium, or he's like this foreign drug dealer essentially. Right, so Sarpedon is opium, and Glaucus is the greenish, whitish, silverish color of the plants, or these glaucin plants, or the Glaucus essentially is how you describe that color, right? Just kind of three different. How can something be green, white, and silver? Well, it's Glaucus.
Interesting too that Glaucus and Diomedes, they meet up in book 6 and they have their exchange. That Diomedes, he is like of the tribe of Judah, but he also means like a cave or a locker room. And that, right, Glaucus is the color green, or he's like a shimmer, and Aeneas is like Jonathan. Athena is like a spider. Alexandros, he's like David. Menelaus, he's like Saul. So, right, if we just read them as such and understand them as words, the myths become more clear, right? That I think it's like David meets Saul in a cave or something, right? And that Diomedes, Alexandros, and Menelaus might interact all at once, or at least in proximity within a certain amount of lines within the Iliad, right? Do you understand? It's just a matter of semantics, right? Just a matter of semantics. We're just arguing semantics.